Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the desert heat of ancient Egypt, where enormous stone triangles loom silently beneath the stars. You've seen the Great Pyramid of Giza before, probably on postcards or fridge magnets. But tonight we're not talking about its usual claims to fame. No tombs, no pharaoh curses, no mummy movies. We're going to look at these pyramids as if they were something else entirely. Energy hubs, ancient power plants, possibly more than just graves for long-dead kings. And yes, the scary part is, if the wildest theories hold any truth at all, you probably wouldn't survive standing inside one for long. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far this reaches. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Great Pyramid has always stood out, not just because it's gigantic or because it was the tallest structure on Earth for almost 4,000 years, but because it just doesn't add up. You've got 2.3 million blocks of limestone and granite, each weighing several tons stacked with sub-millimeter precision, all without cranes or iron tools. Even if you don't buy into the more mystical theories, it still feels like there's something they're not telling us. Most modern Egyptologists agree the pyramids were tombs. That's the official line. But what's strange is that despite how many mummies were buried in Egypt, none have ever been found inside the Great Pyramid. Not a single royal body, not even the tiniest trace of burial goods in its inner chambers. Instead, what we find are tight shafts, oddly resonant chambers, and architectural features that don't seem remotely tomb-like. Some researchers, and a few rather eccentric YouTubers, have pointed out that the internal structure of the Great Pyramid is surprisingly similar to parts of modern machines. There's the so-called King's Chamber, with polished granite that conducts vibration, long tunnels that don't go anywhere, yet seem to align with specific celestial bodies. And weirdest of all, an upper chamber above the King's Chamber that doesn't serve any known purpose, except maybe as a pressure dampener, like in an engine. One theory suggests that the Great Pyramid wasn't a burial site at all, it was a power plant. Yes, you heard that right. The idea is that the pyramid's internal layout, combined with materials like limestone, an insulator, and granite, slightly radioactive and conductive, could have created an energetic reaction, not electricity in the modern sense, but possibly microwave energy, sound vibrations, or even something like wireless power transmission. The kind of stuff that makes your Alexa light up when no one said a word. Here's where it gets more curious. Those narrow shafts inside the pyramid, they're too small for people to crawl through, but they align almost perfectly with stars in Orion's belt, and the constellation Draco, as if they were guiding something in or out. One chamber, known as the Queen's Chamber, no, there's no queen buried there, contains a mysterious niche, and once had traces of zinc and hydrochloric acid. Individually, those don't raise eyebrows. Together, they suggest a chemical reaction, possibly even an energy reaction. Mainstream historians still argue whether this is meaningful or just coincidental. The pyramid is so old, it's hard to know what was original and what came later. But even the skeptics agree. The construction techniques are still largely a mystery. Some of the blocks fit so tightly that not even a sheet of paper can slide between them. And despite centuries of weather, earthquakes, and lootings, the pyramid hasn't shifted. It's aligned to true north, with mind-boggling accuracy, more precise than some 20th century buildings. But let's pull back a moment. Say you're standing in ancient Egypt, 4,500 years ago. You see this monstrous structure rising into the sky. There's no scaffolding, no wheel. People are moving massive stones with wet sand and ropes. That's the official explanation. But many believe something's missing. One particularly strange claim, the pyramid once had a golden capstone, pure gold. Gold, as in the world's best conductor of electricity. And the entire surface was originally covered in smooth white Tura limestone, now mostly stripped away. That outer layer would have reflected sunlight so brilliantly that some ancient sources claimed the pyramid could be seen shining from dozens of miles away. If that's true, it wouldn't just be a monument, it'd be a beacon. Then there's the odd electromagnetic readings taken inside the pyramid's chambers in recent decades. Researchers found that certain rooms concentrate electrical energy at specific points, especially in the king's chamber and underneath it. This doesn't prove anything definitive, but it's weird. Why would a supposed tomb naturally focus energy like a modern radio antenna? Here's your fringe tidbit for the night. Nikola Tesla, the real-life mad scientist of the 20th century, designed one of his wireless energy towers to match the proportions of the Great Pyramid. He reportedly believed the ancient Egyptians had mastered energy transmission in a way we still hadn't. Does that mean the pyramid was literally beaming wireless power across the desert? Probably not. Or maybe not. But it raises one of those deliciously irritating questions that history loves to throw at us. If it was just a tomb, why does it behave like something much more advanced? The idea of ancient people being more advanced than we give them credit for isn't just internet bait. We're not talking alien conspiracies or sci-fi nonsense here. Just real questions. Because sometimes you stare long enough at a thing built in the distant past and realize we couldn't replicate it even today. Not exactly. Not with all our cranes, CAD software and concrete mixers. That's humbling. So the Great Pyramid remains what it's always been. A paradox. An impossibly massive building. Too advanced for its time. Too mysterious for easy explanations. And far too strange to shrug off. It just sits there, unfazed by sandstorms and centuries, daring us to figure it out. And tonight, we're only just beginning. From the heat of the Egyptian sands, we move westward across time and culture to the sunny coasts of the Roman Empire, where another mystery hides not in towering shapes but beneath your feet. Roman concrete. Yes, the very stuff that holds up their crumbling aqueducts and weathered amphitheaters has somehow managed to last longer than most of our modern highways. And no, it wasn't because of magic cement or Mediterranean sunshine. It's because they knew something we didn't, and we're only now catching up. Walk through the remains of any Roman harbor, and you'll find something shocking. Underwater concrete structures that are still solid after 2,000 years. Meanwhile, your cousin's driveway cracks after 3 winters. The Romans didn't have Portland cement, the main ingredient we rely on today. They used volcanic ash from places like Pozzuoli, near Naples, mixing it with lime and seawater. Doesn't sound fancy, right? But when that blend touches water, it undergoes a chemical reaction that strengthens over time instead of weakening. Here's the part that makes scientists tilt their heads. This concrete self-heals, not in a science fiction way, in a chemistry nerd way. When cracks form, the volcanic material reacts with water again and seals them. It's like the concrete goes, nope, not today, and patches itself back up. Mainstream historical fact. The Pantheon Dome, the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world, is still standing after almost 2,000 years, thanks to this genius blend. We can't build a dome that size with our concrete without it cracking wide open. Historians still argue whether the Romans truly understood the long-term chemistry behind their mixture, or if they just got lucky with the ingredients. Either way, it's clear they were playing with something very few other ancient cultures did, and they didn't just slap it onto buildings. They engineered with intent. The proportions varied depending on the structure. In walls, it was 1 ratio. In underwater foundations, another. Someone knew exactly what they were doing. But wait, here's your quirky bit of the night. In 79 CE, Mount Vesuvius erupted and buried Pompeii. Disaster, right? Sure, unless you're into concrete, that eruption blanketed the region with even more of the perfect ash. After that, Roman concrete got even better. Leave it to the Romans to turn a volcanic catastrophe into an upgrade for urban infrastructure. And while we're at it, let's talk about durability. A modern concrete bridge can last maybe 50 to 100 years if maintained well. Some of Rome's aqueducts have gone 20 times that without needing a repair crew in neon vests and hard hats. What's more, they didn't even have steel reinforcement, no rusting rebar. No expansion joints. Just stone, ash, and time. Now, here's the delicious mystery. When modern engineers tried to copy this recipe, it didn't work the same way. Something about the ash today, or the proportions, or the mixing techniques, it just doesn't add up. Some think there's an unknown ingredient lost to history. Others suspect the key lies not in what they mixed, but how they cured it. Maybe even using techniques we haven't reconstructed yet. It's like trying to recreate your grandmother's cookies with the same flour and eggs, but never getting that same chewy center. Digging deeper, you'll find mentions of a secret recipe passed down among Roman builders. Whether that was myth or just old school branding, no one knows. But the result speaks for itself. The Romans didn't just build to impress, they built to outlast. One fringe theory floating around, pun mildly intended, is that some Roman concrete was actually bioreactive, meaning it interacted with marine life to strengthen itself over time. Coral, barnacles, even algae could have helped form a protective shell around underwater structures. So now we're talking about living concrete. That's not just ahead of its time, that's borderline sci-fi. It's also worth noting that the Roman Empire's vast reach meant their concrete was made in many places, with local ingredients. Some of it turned out better than others, sure, but the best examples show that even with regional variation, they understood the core principles: consistency, adaptation, and chemistry, all without a single patent or blueprint. Imagine standing on the old port of Caesarea Maritima, waves crashing around Roman pillars still standing in the surf. Meanwhile, a modern seawall from 1970 is already crumbling a few miles down the coast. You can't help but feel like we missed something. Maybe a lot of somethings. And yes, modern science is catching up. There's a growing field trying to reverse engineer Roman concrete. Engineers have started adding volcanic ash to eco-friendly blends. Some researchers are even proposing Roman-style mixes for future space construction. Apparently, Martian soil is kind of volcanic. So if we ever colonize Mars, the Romans might be the reason your grandkids get a dome that doesn't leak. So next time you step over a crack in the pavement or curse at potholes during your commute, think of the ancient Romans, not just as toga-wearing wine enthusiasts, but as construction nerds who cracked a code we still haven't fully solved. Maybe the reason their roads lead to Rome is because they actually lasted long enough to get there. Now we're heading east, into the ancient world of Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, roughly, and stumbling across something small, unassuming, and completely out of place. It's a clay pot. Inside, there's a copper cylinder. Inside that, an iron rod. And when you hear what people think this thing might be, you'll probably blink twice and wonder if we've time traveled. Because according to some interpretations, the so-called Baghdad battery might have been exactly that, a battery, a functioning electrical device. In 250 BCE, the artifact was discovered in the 1930s near Baghdad, in a place that had once been under the Parthian Empire. At first glance, it looks like a weird vise. But take it apart, and the pieces seem to follow a pattern we now associate with galvanic cells. That's the basic unit of a battery. You've got your copper and iron, two dissimilar metals, and you've got a chamber that could have held an acidic liquid like vinegar or lemon juice. Add those together, and boom, you've got voltage. Not enough to run a toaster or light up a disco ball, sure, but maybe enough to electroplate a thin layer of metal onto a surface. That's what some people think the battery was used for, coating silver or gold onto small objects. Makes sense, right? Except no one has ever found ancient electroplated items in Mesopotamia. Not a single one. Which either means they used this tech sparingly, or we still don't know what we're looking at. Mainstream archaeologists aren't fully convinced. Some say the device might have just been a container for scrolls or sacred items, and the iron and copper parts coincidentally fit together in a way that looks familiar to us now. Others argue the materials weren't insulated well enough to function reliably as a battery. Historians still argue whether this was accidental, ritualistic, or genuinely technological, but the "it was a battery" camp won't budge. Experiments have shown that if you pour vinegar into the replica and connect the metals, you get about 1 volt of electricity. Not much, but it's a start. Combine a few of these clay cells in series, and you've got enough juice to shock yourself, or to coat a trinket in a paper-thin layer of gold. Suddenly, Mesopotamian bling starts to look suspiciously high-tech. Now, here's your fringe tidbit. Some researchers have pushed the theory even further. They suggest that these batteries were used for electrotherapy, ancient medicine, but make it electric. That's right, tiny shocks to treat pain, stimulate muscles, or connect with divine forces. Is there proof? No. Is it the kind of thing a sleep-deprived historian might dream up at 3 a.m.? Absolutely. But it's not the wildest theory out there. And here's where things get a little spooky. Around the same time this object might have been in use, ancient texts start talking about divine fire, sacred sparks, and objects that give off light. Coincidence? Maybe, but it's enough to make you squint at that little clay jar and wonder what else the Parthians were tinkering with. Of course, let's not get carried away. Nobody's saying they were charging iPhones in 2050 BCE. There were no light bulbs, no electric cars, no TikTok algorithms, ruining society. But what if they were experimenting? What if this wasn't a fluke, but a fragment of a larger toolkit? A whole category of ancient tech that disappeared because it wasn't widespread, or because nobody wrote it down. And this raises one of those infuriating questions. If we didn't know what a battery was, would we recognize one? If you dropped a car alternator into a medieval monastery, they'd probably call it a holy relic. Same thing applies backwards. Maybe there's tech buried in old ruins that we keep misidentifying as incense burners, ceremonial doodads, or soup bowls. All because we can't imagine they had the know-how. Let's put it in perspective. The concept of electricity is barely 300 years old in modern science. The idea of controlled voltage, only about 200. We think of ancient people as ignorant because they didn't have Wi-Fi or espresso machines. But some of them were astronomers, chemists, engineers. They didn't need our terminology to build something functional. They just needed materials and motivation. Here's a fun comparison. Benjamin Franklin's famous lightning experiment with the kite and key was in 1752. That's 2,000 years after the Baghdad battery may have been built. Imagine if those Mesopotamian tinkerers had passed their knowledge down uninterrupted. We might have hit the electrical age a millennium early. Steam engines in the Roman Empire, maybe. Microwave popcorn in ancient Greece. Well, maybe not that far. Still, the Baghdad battery remains one of those historical outliers. A little too clever for its time. A little too mysterious for comfort. No user manual. No instruction plate. Just the parts, neatly arranged, whispering to us across centuries, figure me out. So next time someone tells you history is boring, show them the clay pot that might have jump-started a necklace or a revolution, and then remind them that sometimes the most powerful tech doesn't look like a spaceship, it looks like a forgotten jar in a museum basement. We're sailing now into the warm, salt-crusted waters of the Aegean Sea, where fishermen once pulled up something that changed how we understand ancient intelligence. It looked like a lump of rusted gears fused into coral and barnacle. Nobody thought much of it at first, just another wrecked bit of bronze from some Roman ship. But once it hit the lab and they started scraping away centuries of sea life, they found it the Antikythera mechanism, a machine so sophisticated that for a long time, people refused to believe it was ancient at all. This thing is no crude sundial or primitive abacus. It's a full-blown analog computer. Built in the 2nd century BCE, it could calculate lunar phases, predict eclipses, track planetary movements, and maybe even signal the timing of ancient Olympic Games. And it did all of this with interlocking gears so precise, you'd assume they came off a Swiss watch. It's easy to look at the gears now and forget just how absurd this should be. Precision machining isn't something historians associate with the ancient world, but here it is. Bronze cogs, intricate differentials, teeth cut with such exact spacing that they'd fit nicely into a 19th century clock factory. There's no other device like it in the archaeological for another 1,000 years. Then suddenly, in medieval Europe, complex gearwork reappears as if it just reinvents itself. Historians still argue whether the Antikythera mechanism was a one-off, a lost masterpiece, or part of a whole tradition of mechanical astronomy that simply vanished. Some say it was built in Rhodes, where engineers like Hipparchus and Posidonius were fiddling with spheres and star maps. Others think it came from Pergamon, another ancient knowledge hub. But no one really knows who made it, how they got so good at gearwork, or why nothing else like it survived. Now here's your quirky tidbit. When they scanned the mechanism using modern imaging tech, they found Greek inscriptions crammed between the gears, basically a user manual in ancient Greek. Turns out, even 2,000 years ago, people needed instructions to work their gadgets, and just like today, nobody reads the manual unless something breaks. More recent reconstructions suggest the device had at least 30 interlocking gears. Some believe it originally had over 70. It wasn't just a calculator, it was cosmological art. It reflected not only math and engineering, but also philosophy, mythology, and a deep understanding of celestial cycles. And if that doesn't weird you out, consider this. It used a form of differential gearing that wouldn't be seen again until the 1800s, in a carriage clock. So how did it work? Imagine turning a crank. That motion goes into a complex web of gears. Turn it once, and the machine shows you the positions of the sun and moon for any date you pick. Turn it again, and it tells you whether there will be an eclipse next year. One dial follows the 19-year Metonic cycle, a tricky bit of lunar math that even modern students struggle with. Another predicts the Saros cycle, which tracks eclipses every 18 years or so. That's high-level astronomy, squeezed into a box the size of a shoebox. And it wasn't just practical, it was beautiful. The outer case, now mostly gone, would have had labels, dials, possibly even rotating hands. Some researchers think the front had little statues or celestial motifs. It was as much a work of craftsmanship as it was a brainy tool. Basically, imagine if Galileo and an Apple designer teamed up to make a horoscope machine, and then someone threw it overboard during a storm. Now, there's a juicy fringe theory that this wasn't a one-of-a-kind wonder, but just one of many. That somewhere in the ancient world, maybe in Alexandria, maybe in a forgotten Greek lab, were workshops full of gear-driven marvels. Orreries, calculators, devices we'd call mechanical computers, and they were all lost. Not because they were bad, but because they were too good for their time. When the Roman Empire fell, so did the institutions that understood how to build and maintain these tools. And here's the kicker. For years, nobody believed the Antikythera mechanism was real. When it was first studied, some archaeologists assumed it was a modern plant, some kind of prank. That's how out of place it was. A tiny mechanical sun tracker, built when most of the world still thought stars were just dots on a dome. So we're left with one corroded machine and 1,000 questions. Was this the peak of some forgotten field? Did the inventor leave behind notes, diagrams, apprentices? If so, where are they? Are they buried under libraries that burned, sunken ships that haven't been found yet, or mislabeled museum boxes gathering dust in back rooms? Whatever the case, the Antikythera mechanism reminds us that history isn't a straight line, it zigzags. Sometimes, a civilization stumbles onto something brilliant, then loses it for centuries. Genius flickers, then disappears, and when we find its remnants again, half-crushed, sea-stained, and impossibly complex, it makes you wonder what else the past managed to build and forget. Now let's walk carefully into the middle of a giant stone circle in southern England, where massive slabs stand in eerie silence, ringed by sheep and mist. You've seen photos of Stonehenge. Sure, you know the clichés, druids, solstices, tourists pretending to levitate. But what you probably didn't know is that Stonehenge isn't just a visual enigma, it's an acoustic one. Because beyond its astronomical alignments and burial mysteries, Stonehenge might have been designed to play with sound in ways that still puzzle scientists. You're standing in the middle of those towering sarsen stones. The breeze dies down. Someone claps, and the echo doesn't bounce off like in a canyon. It kind of folds around you. The stones swallow it, bend it, shape it. Archaeologists and acoustic engineers have recreated the layout. with models and digital simulations. And what they found is strange. Stonehenge behaves like a sound chamber, not quite an amphitheater, not quite a whispering gallery, but something intentional. Mainstream fact here: Stonehenge's builders were obsessed with placement. The stones aren't just plopped down randomly, they're aligned with sunrise and sunset, at the solstices, with lunar movements, and perhaps with even deeper cycles of the sky. But the idea that they also arranged these enormous blocks for sound, that's a newer, weirder frontier. Some researchers noticed that rhythmic drumming inside the ring creates an echo effect that can amplify or dampen depending on where you stand. It's the kind of feature you usually find in temples and concert halls, not in a chilly field 5,000 years ago. Here's where it gets a bit spooky. A few scholars think the stones may have been chosen specifically because they ring when struck. Not like bells, exactly, but they produce a dull, resonant tone. Sound archaeologists, yes, that's a job, tested some of the bluestones from Stonehenge's inner circle and found they produce a metallic ping when hit. They call them ringing rocks. These particular stones were hauled all the way from Wales over 150 miles away. You don't do that unless the material is special. And yes, historians still argue whether this was a musical decision, a ritual one, or just a weird side effect. But imagine an ancient ceremony under the stars, with dozens of people chanting, drumming, singing. The stones echo and absorb, shaping the sound. You don't just hear it, you feel it, like bass vibrations at a concert, but with the cosmos overhead instead of flashing lights. Now for your fringe fact: some researchers believe Stonehenge may have induced trance-like states through sound. Not because they had synthesizers or dubstep, but because of how low-frequency sound waves interact with the brain. Sustained drumming, amplified through those stones, might have altered consciousness. That sounds like New Age fluff, until you remember that similar things happen in modern sensory studies. Some frequencies really do shift how our brains behave. Of course, the acoustic theory has critics. Some say the echoes are too subtle to matter, that without a roof, it's not a true resonant space, that the stones may just reflect sound coincidentally. But even those skeptics admit something else. The whole site is built with a scale of precision that's hard to dismiss as purely decorative. The layout, the engineering, the hauling of rocks across great distances, it's all deliberate. So if they cared that much about light and shadow, why not sound? There's also a curious pattern in ancient architecture. All over the world, people built spaces with weird acoustic effects. Mayan temples that bounce back handclaps like bird calls. Egyptian tombs that hum when you chant in the right tone. Neolithic caves where voices seem to come from nowhere. None of these people had microphones or waveform analysis, but they had ears, and they knew what felt powerful. Let's also not forget, music wasn't just entertainment. In ancient societies it was sacred, ritualistic, healing, magical. If sound shaped emotion, memory, or even weather, according to some charmingly optimistic rain dances, then structures like Stonehenge may have been instruments in themselves, tuned not to melodies but to moods. So imagine again the stone circle at twilight. A group enters, barefoot, wrapped in furs or painted in ochre. Drums begin to throb, chanting rises. A low hum starts to reverberate around the inner ring. It's not loud, but it's thick, like sound made of syrup, the kind that settles into your chest. You can't tell where it's coming from anymore. The stars begin to peek out overhead. And suddenly you're not just hearing something, you're part of it. Stonehenge may not be a stage, but it might have been a speaker, or a tuning chamber, or maybe just a sacred space where the sky sang back. We may never know exactly what they were hearing, or why it mattered so much, but standing there, among the stones, with the wind hushing through gaps older than the English language, it's hard not to feel like something's listening too. Now we're stepping onto the solid stone foundations of Mesoamerica, land of the Maya, the Aztecs, and a few lesser-known builders, whose names barely made it into history class. You know what people always say about these civilizations? Pyramids, calendars, human sacrifice. What they rarely mention is how good these people were at surviving earthquakes. Like suspiciously good. Their temples and step pyramids didn't just look cool, they withstood tremors that make modern buildings wobble like jello. And they did it all without steel, without concrete, and without anyone handing them a seismic design manual. Let's get our bearings. Mesoamerica sits right on the Ring of Fire, basically the planet's most active shake zone. Earthquakes were common, destructive, and terrifying, but somehow, structures like the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan and the Temple of the Inscriptions in Palenque are still standing, even after centuries of quakes and volcanoes and the occasional looter with a crowbar. Mainstream historians will tell you that the Maya and the Aztecs built with limestone and volcanic rock, sometimes with packed earth or adobe. All pretty basic stuff, but what they gloss over is how they arranged it. Builders used a construction method that was astonishingly ahead of its time. Multi-layered platforms, trapezoidal shapes, interlocking stone blocks, and in some cases deliberately loose joints that acted like early shock absorbers. That's right, they built in flexibility on purpose, like they knew the earth was going to lurch and roll underneath them, and planned for it. Some of these temples had what's now called base isolation features. Modern buildings use this trick to reduce quake damage. It involves floating the building above the ground in some way, allowing it to sway without collapsing. The ancients did it with layers of sand, gravel, and cut stone that could shift slightly and absorb vibration. No blueprints, no physics equations, just deep, intuitive engineering. Now here's your quirky bit. The Maya may have encoded some of this architectural knowledge into their mythology. There are stories of the world being destroyed and rebuilt multiple times, always with shifting earth and crumbling mountains. Some archaeologists think this wasn't just metaphor, it was memory. A cultural record of seismic events that taught generations to build smarter. And then there's the layout. Temples were rarely built in perfect squares. Instead, many were deliberately slanted, sloped, or staggered, not just for aesthetics, but because perfectly vertical walls are more likely to topple during a quake. A trapezoid shape spreads stress more evenly, keeping the structure stable. Modern engineers use similar angles in earthquake-resistant buildings. The ancients had no seismic meters or stress maps, but they had trial error and a lot of motivation to not get squashed. Historians still argue whether the Maya had a formal understanding of seismology, or if their designs evolved through generations of, if it didn't fall over, keep doing that. Either way it worked, and the evidence is literally standing. Let's not forget Teotihuacan. We don't even know what the original builders called it. The Aztecs found it abandoned and named it the place where gods were born. The Pyramid of the Sun, one of the largest in the world, sits right on a fault line. You'd think that would be a terrible idea until you realize the base is designed in layers with thick support walls that act like buffers. It's not brute force keeping that thing upright, it's balance. Want to get weirder? In some structures like the Templo Mayor in Mexico City, archaeologists have found materials like crushed shells and mica embedded in the foundations. These aren't just decorative. Crushed shells compact well and offer cushioning under stress. Mica reflects heat, but it also resists cracking under pressure. It's like someone was picking materials with a checklist of stuff that handles earthquakes. And here's the wild fringe theory. Some people think the most earthquake-resistant sites were also chosen for their sound. That deep hum you sometimes hear in temples. It's not always the wind. Some believe the vibrations of the earth. Yes, literal seismic energy were considered sacred. They say that by building in places where the earth sang, the ancients were connecting spiritual significance with geological safety. Again, we're drifting into poetic territory, but the overlap is fascinating. Now, picture this. You're a temple builder in ancient Guatemala. You've just seen your neighbor's stone shrine collapse during a quake. You don't have a textbook or a geotechnical lab, but you do know that when your uncle built his pyramid with sloped steps and a gravel underlayer, it didn't crack, so you copy it. You teach your apprentices. They build more. Over time, it becomes custom, then tradition, then dogma. And just like that, a civilization becomes earthquake-proof, one jolt at a time. Even modern engineers study these structures. There have been conferences, yes, real academic conferences, where structural engineers look at ancient ruins to figure out what they missed in their own designs. In some tests, scale models of Mesoamerican temples performed better than reinforced concrete buildings from the 20th century. That's equal parts impressive and embarrassing. So no, the Maya didn't have calculators. The Aztecs didn't run stress tests on computer simulations, but they watched, they learned, and they built in a way that outlasted empires, outshone colonial architecture, and still makes tourists stare up in confused admiration. And maybe, just maybe, they knew more than we think. Maybe some of those architectural choices weren't just functional, they were philosophical. A way of showing that even in a world that shakes and crumbles, you can still build something that holds. Because while the earth may not always stay still, those stones still do. Now we're drifting across time to ancient China, where legend, fear, and technology converge inside a massive underground complex that no one's quite allowed to explore. You've heard of the Terracotta Army, that frozen battalion of clay soldiers guarding the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. What you probably haven't heard is what lies beneath them. Not just a burial chamber, but a rumored labyrinth of rivers. Rivers made of liquid mercury, and that's not even the weirdest part. According to ancient texts, the emperor's tomb was a sprawling underground world, complete with miniature palaces, a dome studded with pearls to represent the night sky, and flowing rivers of mercury to simulate China's great waterways. The walls were said to be rigged with crossbows, ready to fire at intruders. Sounds like a trap-laden dungeon from a fantasy game. Right, except this wasn't fiction, it was historical record, written by Sima Chan in the 1st century BCE. And the eerie part, science is starting to prove him right. For decades, archaeologists avoided digging into the central tomb mound, partly out of respect, partly out of fear of damaging what lay inside. But in recent years, scientists used ground-penetrating radar and remote sensing to study the site without disturbing it. What did they find? Extremely high levels of mercury in the soil around the tomb. Too high to be natural. It's just there, leaking up through the earth. Exactly where the text said it would be. Nobody's touched the central chamber. No one's been inside. But the mercury's already escaping. Mainstream historians still argue whether those rivers were literal or symbolic. Was it a poetic metaphor for wealth and power? Or did ancient Chinese engineers somehow master the storage and channeling of one of the deadliest substances on Earth, without plastic, metal tanks, or hazmat suits? If it's real, it means they were capable of containing a flowing, poisonous metal in sculpted terrain underground. And so far we don't know how. Let's talk mercury for a second. It's liquid at room temperature, it's dense, about 13 times heavier than water, and highly toxic. Even modern labs treat it with extreme caution. So imagine the engineering it would take to dig artificial canals in an underground mausoleum, fill them with mercury, and keep them from leaking for over 2,000 years. We can barely get our air conditioning to work properly. These people were building chemical death traps for their corpses. Here's your fringe tidbit. Some believe the mercury wasn't just for show, that it may have served a protective purpose, not just as a deterrent to grave robbers, but as an attempt at immortality. The emperor was obsessed with it. Historical records say he consumed mercury pills daily, believing they'd make him live forever. Spoiler alert, they didn't. He died young, probably from mercury poisoning, but his obsession with longevity might have shaped the entire design of his tomb. A final act of immortality, a poisonous moat to keep death or desecration at bay. And yes, some researchers have even floated the theory that the tomb contains forgotten machinery, that the mechanisms used to regulate the traps or move parts of the chamber were powered by hydraulics or counterweights, long since decayed. Others think the tomb was wired. Yes, wired, with some kind of early detection system, like pressure plates or triggered bolts. There's no direct evidence yet, but the idea lingers, especially when you realize how little we've actually uncovered. Because here's the thing, no one has opened the emperor's tomb. Not in full. The Terracotta Army was discovered by accident in 1974 by farmers digging a well. What they found was the outskirts of the burial complex, the real tomb, the central chamber, the supposed rivers. The mechanism-filled heart is still untouched, and there's a real reason for that. We don't have the technology to explore it safely. Let that sink in. We've landed probes on Mars, mapped the ocean floor, and created artificial intelligence that can write bedtime history scripts. But we can't open a tomb from 2010 BCE without risking irreparable damage, either to the artifacts inside or the people trying to get in. Between the high mercury concentration, unknown structural conditions, and potential booby traps, it's safer left sealed. For now, historians, archaeologists, and even the Chinese government remain cautious. The official stance is preservation. Once opened, the tomb's contents could oxidize and decay within days. Better to wait until we can scan and extract without breaking things, or releasing clouds of toxic vapor into the air. But curiosity builds. Every year, new tech gives us sharper scans, deeper readings, more clues. And each time we peer into that hidden mound, we find more reason to believe the ancient stories weren't exaggerations. They might have actually underplayed it. Imagine what's waiting under there. A dark chamber lined with shimmering metal, artificial rivers glowing faintly under torchlight, crossbows rigged to fire if you step wrong, a ceiling glittering with constellations, the silent figure of a dead emperor watching from his throne, encased in wealth and madness. We don't know when the tomb will finally be opened. Maybe in 10 years, maybe never. But what we do know is this. Ancient China was playing a long game. They didn't just bury their kings, they entombed them in nightmares. Beautiful, toxic nightmares built with an understanding of chemistry and design that feels both impossibly old and strangely modern. And until we have the tools to unlock it, the tomb of Qin Shi Huang remains one of the most enigmatic, dangerous, and technically baffling burial sites on the planet. A place where immortality, architecture, and fear all mix into a secret we still can't quite explain. Now we're soaring up into the sky, or at least trying to over the arid plains of southern Peru, where the earth has been carved with shapes so massive you can't even see them properly from the ground. Lines stretch for miles, shapes of hummingbirds, monkeys, spiders, even a stylized astronaut-looking figure with waving arms. Welcome to the Nazca Lines, one of the strangest, most hauntingly geometric mysteries of the ancient world. They were made by removing the top layer of reddish stones to reveal the pale ground underneath, leaving sharply defined shapes that have lasted for over 1,000 years. No fences, no maintenance, and yet somehow they've survived hurricanes, winds, and Instagram influencers with drones. That's pretty miraculous in itself. But the real kicker, they're too big to be fully appreciated unless you're flying overhead, which raises a deliciously problematic question. Why make art no one can see? Mainstream archaeology says the Nazca people made these lines between 500 BCA and 500 CA. They probably used basic tools, ropes, wooden stakes, maybe some surveying tricks to get their lines straight. And yes, some of the geometric ones can be drawn on paper using simple math, but we're not talking about a doodle in the dirt. The biggest shapes stretch hundreds of meters. The monkey, for example, has a coiled tail longer than a football field. So how did they map it out so perfectly without aerial assistance? That's where things get interesting. Historians still argue whether the lines were purely ceremonial, astronomical, or had something to do with water. One theory says they were giant walking paths, ritual trails that mirrored the heavens or led to sacred springs. Others think they were offerings to sky gods, meant to be viewed from above. And that's where fringe theories start flapping their wings. Let's talk about the balloon idea. In 1975, a researcher named Jim Woodman wondered, what if the Nazca people actually could fly? Not with planes, obviously, but with hot air balloons. The theory goes like this. They had access to materials like cotton, plant fibers, and clay pots. That's enough to make a primitive balloon and a burner. In fact, some people actually built a functioning model using only pre-Columbian materials. It floated. Now, does that mean the Nazca were sailing balloons over the Andes like ancient Peruvian astronauts? Probably not. But it does show it's physically possible. And once you've seen a geoglyph from the air, the scale suddenly makes sense. These weren't sidewalk murals. They were meant for the sky. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some of the Nazca lines align with solstices, lunar standstills, and key points in the agricultural calendar. So maybe they were like a giant farming calendar etched into the desert. A cosmic schedule drawn in dust. Still, that doesn't explain the animals, or the strange humanoid waving hello from a hillside, or why some of the lines are perfectly straight over miles of bumpy, uneven terrain. Another theory says the lines were part of water rituals. The Nazca lived in one of the driest places on Earth. Some of the lines point toward aquifers and underground streams. Maybe the shapes were prayers, or symbolic maps showing the locations of life-giving water. But if that's true, why turn them into animals? Why the immense scale? Why make a stylized spider, only visible from 300 feet in the air, to say dig here? And here's a spooky little twist. That spider? It's an exact match for a rare species found only in the Amazon rainforest, not Peru. So either someone traveled very far to see that spider, or they had incredibly detailed knowledge of biology, or it's just a weird coincidence that keeps archaeologists up at night. Then there's the idea that the lines were musical pathways. Some researchers believe that, as people walked the lines during rituals, they created rhythms with their feet, drums or flutes, essentially turning the desert into a massive instrument, a silent composition only fully heard when performed as a group, like a music sheet stretched over 200 square miles. Still, that doesn't explain the precision, the scale, the choice of shapes, and the lingering sense that someone somewhere was meant to see it from above. Which brings us to the elephant in the room: aliens. Yep, the Nazca lines are catnip for ancient astronaut theorists. If you've ever been bored on cable TV at 2 a.m., you've probably heard someone with wild hair talking about landing strips for extraterrestrial visitors, long runways etched into the ground, giant humanoids waving hello, all perfectly visible from the sky. Is it true? Almost definitely not. But does it capture the weirdness? Kind of. Because whether it was for gods, weather, water, or just artistic expression, the fact remains, a pre-industrial society made precision art on a scale we associate with satellites. That's baffling. And maybe that's the real wonder. Not aliens, not balloons, but human ingenuity. The sheer determination to mark the Earth in a way that echoes across centuries, even when no one's quite sure why. They didn't leave a key, no user manual, just lines in the sand. Perfect lines, spirals, birds, beasts, all waiting for someone to rise above and finally understand what it all meant. Now the sea air turns acrid and smoky as we dock beside the decks of ancient Byzantine warships, each one outfitted with one of the most terrifying weapons the medieval world had ever seen: Greek fire. This was no ordinary blaze. It burned on water. It stuck to ships, to people, to anything unlucky enough to be caught in its path. It hissed, it roared, and it couldn't be extinguished with water. Buckets only made it worse, and the most maddening part: we still don't know exactly what it was. Greek fire was the terror of naval battles from the 7th century onward. The Byzantines deployed it with horrifying efficiency, especially against Arab fleets threatening Constantinople. Eyewitness accounts describe fire raining from the sky, flowing like oil and clinging to flesh. This wasn't a flaming arrow, it was more like a medieval flamethrower. And while some assume it was just a version of petroleum or naphtha, no one's managed to recreate it exactly. Let's get into what we do know. Greek fire was often launched from siphon-like devices mounted on the prows of ships. Think pressurized hoses, but made with bronze, not rubber, and pumped by hand. They aimed and sprayed, and suddenly, the enemy ship was engulfed in fire that spread across the water. That's already breaking the rules of basic fire safety. It's like watching someone set a puddle of gasoline on fire, and then seeing the puddle chase you. Mainstream historical fact: this terrifying invention helped the Byzantines survive multiple sieges that should have ended them. It turned the tide of war more than once. particularly during the Second Arab Siege of Constantinople in 777 The fire not only destroyed ships but demoralized the attackers. How do you fight something that turns the sea itself into a weapon? Historians still argue whether the formula was truly lost or deliberately erased. It was considered a state secret of the highest order. Recipes, if they were ever written down, have vanished. Some think they were only passed orally between select military engineers. Others suspect the formula was never consistent in the first place, more of a family of mixtures than one exact brew. And here's your quirky tidbit. One theory claims the ingredients included quicklime, sulfur, resin, and crude oil, mixed in exact proportions that would ignite on contact with air or water. Another posits that saltpeter and pine resin gave it that sticky, inescapable quality, but no combination quite adds up to what the ancient accounts describe. Modern chemistry can replicate something similar, but not the full madness, the adhesive burn, the floating blaze, the sheer horror. There's even a theory that Greek fire was a two-part weapon. One vessel carried the flammable mixture, another sprayed a separate chemical like vinegar or seawater that triggered combustion, a chemical booby trap. Light the wrong end, and your own ship becomes a floating funeral pyre. We do know the fire was often delivered via clay grenades, two small breakable pots launched by hand or sling. These would smash on impact and burst into flame. Some variants may have been similar to Molotov cocktails. Others, who knows? There might have been different mixtures for different conditions, thicker for sticking to wood, thinner for spraying into enemy sails. And let's not forget the siphon devices. Imagine rowing your ship within range, your crewmates pumping furiously behind you, the pressure building in a bronze tube coiled with heat, the hiss and spit of something unholy leaking from the nozzle. Then fire lashes across the water like a living thing. It leaps, it crawls, it doesn't go out. That's not just a battle tactic, that's psychological warfare. One chilling legend tells of a Byzantine ship catching fire from its own Greek fire weapon. Possibly due to a sudden change in wind, the flames turned inward, licking up the wooden deck. Panic spread. Sailors jumped into the sea, only to find themselves surrounded by burning water. No escape. That's the kind of story that makes people swear never to go near that stuff again. And yet, it worked. The mere rumor of Greek fire kept enemies at bay. Some historians argue that its reputation might have outpaced its actual use, that it wasn't deployed as often as people think, but when it was unforgettable. A strategic nuke in an age of swords and spears. The fire's legacy burned long after the last true formula disappeared. Later European armies tried to recreate it, calling their versions wildfire or sea fire. They never quite matched the effect. Modern pyrotechnics can mimic parts of it. Napalm comes close, but we still haven't nailed the exact mixture. And honestly, we might not want to. Because Greek fire isn't just a lost recipe, it's a symbol of that moment in history when science, secrecy, and spectacle collided. A formula so potent that it bent the course of empires. A weapon so terrifying, it was almost supernatural. And the fact that it's still a mystery, that's the spark that keeps it burning in our imagination. Now we're stepping onto a remote, wind-battered island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Easter Island, or Rapa Nui as it's traditionally known. You've seen the moai before, those giant stone heads with blank expressions, jutting chins, and oddly soulful eyes. But they're not just heads. Most of them have full bodies, buried up to the neck in volcanic soil. They're enormous, they're heavy, and they're absolutely everywhere. And here's the mystery. How did the Rapa Nui people move these multi-ton statues, without wheels, without metal tools, and without draft animals? The answer might sound ridiculous. They walked. That's right. According to local oral history, the Moai walked to their final positions. And no, that's not just poetic, it's literal. Some descendants insisted that the statues were made to sway and shimmy along the roads. For years, everyone dismissed it, until a few curious archaeologists decided to test the idea. They carved a replica statue, tied ropes to its sides, and had people rock it back and forth. It wobbled forward, clumsily, slowly, but it moved, upright, just like the stories said. Let's set the scene. The tallest moai stands over 30 feet high, the heaviest weighs more than 80 tons. That's heavier than a modern semi-truck, and yet hundreds of these statues were transported across rugged terrain, often over 10 miles from the quarry at Rano Raraku. No evidence of giant sleds, no wheel tracks, no herds of oxen, just stone statues and narrow paths carved into the island's hillsides. That alone should have us scratching our heads. Mainstream archaeologists believe the moai were moved using ropes and human coordination, rocked from side to side in careful rhythm. A team in 2012 showed that with just 3 teams of people pulling ropes in sync, a 5-ton moai could walk upright over flat terrain. Add in some practice and a prayer to the ancestral gods, and it's not hard to imagine it becoming a sacred procession. But here's the strange part. Many statues were never finished. Dozens still lie partially carved in the quarry, as if the workers just dropped their tools and left. Others sit abandoned on ancient roadsides, toppled mid-journey. What happened? A sudden collapse in society, a shift in belief, an environmental catastrophe. Historians still argue whether the island's deforestation played a role. Some suggest the islanders cut down too many trees for moving statues, boats, and firewood, eventually destroying their own ecosystem. Others think rats, yes, rats, ate the seeds of the palm trees, preventing regrowth. Either way, by the time Europeans arrived in the 18th century, the statue making had stopped, and the society that built them was in steep decline. Now here's your quirky tidbit. Some moai have coral eyes with red pupils, added only after they were placed upright on their ahu platforms. These weren't just decorations, they symbolized the moai waking up. The belief was that once installed, the statues watched over the island, radiating a sacred power called mana. They weren't monuments, they were participants. Ancestors made visible, guardians with enormous judgmental faces, and yet, despite their size, the moai were deeply personal. Some were carved with unique features, elongated ears, distinctive lips, specific headdresses. They weren't generic stone people. They were meant to resemble individuals, possibly revered chiefs, or important ancestors. It's like if your family built a statue of great-great-grandpa, and then spent weeks dragging him up a mountain by hand to watch over the land. Another mystery, how were they carved so precisely with only stone tools? The quarry rock is soft volcanic tuff, but even so, creating smooth contours and symmetrical features on a 20-foot face isn't easy. The tools they used were basalt picks, basically sharpened rocks. The carving process may have taken months per statue, and yet the level of detail, especially in the later moai, is startling. Some of the ahu platforms where the statues stand are even older than the moai themselves. These stone foundations were built with extreme precision. Stones were placed without mortar, yet they've held together through earthquakes, tsunamis and centuries of wind. It's a level of masonry we usually associate with Incan walls or Japanese castles. Not a tiny island 2,000 miles from anywhere. And remember, no written language, no blueprints, no wheels. Just collective memory, muscle, and motivation. The fact that this culture pulled off an island-wide sculptural feat with only stone and determination is frankly absurd and awe-inspiring. Still, the walking theory isn't universally accepted. Some researchers argue that the rocking method only works on flat land, while much of Easter Island's terrain is uneven. Others suggest the moai were moved lying down on sleds made of wood, dragged by sheer manpower. But no matter the method, the mystery remains. Why devote so much effort to building and moving giant stone figures? The answer likely lies in belief. The Rapa Nui viewed the moai as vessels of ancestral power. Each one linked the living to the dead, to the land, and to the sacred. The more impressive the statue, the more mana it held. Building moai wasn't just about legacy, it was survival, a spiritual investment in fertility, rain, prosperity. So the next time you see one of those solemn stone faces in a photo, remember it might have walked to that spot, not with feet, not with wheels, but with ropes, sweat, chanting and faith. 1,000 years ago, a people cut a god from a mountain, gave it eyes, and made it move. That's not just engineering, that's devotion written in stone. Now we shift to the dry, sun-bleached heart of India, where something impossible has been quietly defying nature for over 16 centuries. In Delhi, tucked behind a fence near the Qutb Minar complex, stands the Iron Pillar of Delhi, a slender, unassuming metal column just over 7 meters tall. It doesn't rust. That's the whole mystery. It's made of iron. It's been standing in rain, heat, humidity, and pollution for 1,600 years, and it hasn't corroded at all. Now, to be clear, it should have rusted. Modern iron rusts all the time. Leave a bike out in the rain for a week, and you'll see flakes forming. But this pillar, smooth, clean, a dark, glossy patina that's more protective armor than damage. It's not stainless steel. It's not painted. It's ancient iron, and yet it's laughing in the face of time like it has a secret. Mainstream historians confirm that the pillar was built during the Gupta Empire, likely around the 4th or 5th century CE. Its inscriptions praise King Chandragupta II and contain Sanskrit verses that have weathered just as well as the metal itself. It's a cultural artifact, yes, but also a technical one. The mystery isn't just why it's still standing, it's how it's still standing, so perfectly. So, how did they do it? Scientists examining the pillar found a thin layer of a compound called misorwhite, basically a mix of iron, oxygen, and hydrogen. This layer is only 20 microns thick, but it's incredibly stable. It prevents oxygen from reaching the metal beneath. But here's the twist. This protective film didn't come from an applied coating. It formed naturally because of the way the iron was forged. The ancient blacksmiths used a technique that left a high phosphorus content in the metal. That phosphorus, combined with the local climate and the way the iron was slowly cooled during forging, created conditions for this miraculous anti-rust shield to form, which is impressive because modern steelmakers actively try to remove phosphorus. Usually, it weakens the structure, but in this case, it's the hero of the story. Historians still argue whether this outcome was intentional. Did the Gupta metallurgists know they were creating corrosion-proof iron, or did they stumble into it by accident while trying to make the strongest column they could? There's no definitive answer, no instruction manual, no metalworking notes found carved into nearby walls. Just one perfect pillar and a lot of educated guesses. And here's your quirky tidbit. Local legend says that if you can stand with your back to the pillar and wrap your arms around it until your hands touch, your wish will come true. For years, tourists tried, rubbing the iron until the government put up a fence to stop the wear and tear. Now you have to admire it from a distance. No wish-granting hugs allowed. But the real magic is in the engineering. The pillar was likely forged by welding together smaller iron discs, massive ones, heated in charcoal furnaces, pounded and fused without any modern tools. It weighs over 6 tons and was probably hauled upright using elephants, ropes, and a sheer refusal to let gravity win. Yet despite its age and the rudimentary tools available, it's almost perfectly symmetrical, with only minor imperfections visible. Some metallurgists have tried replicating the process. They've managed to make similar phosphorus-rich iron in small batches, but producing it on the scale of the Delhi pillar, that's another story. It would require specialized knowledge, high-temperature control, and a team of skilled smiths, which makes you wonder, was this kind of iron-making common in ancient India, or was this a one-off masterpiece? Other ancient Indian iron artifacts do exist, tools, weapons, other structures, but none with quite the same resistance to corrosion. Some researchers think the answer may also lie in the location. Delhi's relatively dry climate may have helped preserve the pillar. Still, it's been through monsoons, acid rain, and industrial pollution from the surrounding city, and it's still unfazed, like it's wearing some invisible force field against time. There's even been talk of using the pillar as a model for sustainable materials. Engineers studying its composition believe that ancient metallurgy might hold clues for designing more durable, rust-resistant structures without relying on toxic or expensive coatings. In other words, a 1600-year-old column might teach us how to build longer-lasting bridges. And yet, despite all the tests, scans, and studies, there's something quietly profound about the iron pillar. It doesn't shout for attention. It's not flashy. It's not giant, but it's persistent, unbothered, still standing in the same spot while empires have risen and fallen around it. So while people rush past it to see the towering corped minar nearby, the real miracle might just be this slim, dark column of ancient science, a monument not just to a king or a god, but to the quiet brilliance of people who understood their craft so deeply that even the forces of nature couldn't undo it. Now we're climbing high into the thin air of the Bolivian Altiplano, where the sun beats down on a field of stone so precise, so geometrically perfect, that people still whisper about aliens, lasers, or time-traveling stonemasons. Welcome to Tiahuanaco, sometimes spelled Tiahuanaco, a ruined city perched at over 12,000 feet above sea level, and tucked within its strange stonework is one of archaeology's most persistent headaches, a collection of blocks at a site called Puma Punku, carved with angles so sharp and slots so uniform that they look like they were machined but were supposedly made by people without metal tools. Let's start with the basics. Puma Punku is part of a larger ceremonial complex, believed to have been built over 1,000 years ago by the Tiwanaku civilization. That's well before the Inca. The site contains massive stones, some weighing over 100 tons, cut from granite and diorite, two of the hardest stones on Earth. For reference, granite is harder than steel, and yet these people, living before the invention of the wheel in this region, managed to shape it into perfect 90-degree angles, crisp edges, and intricate interlocking patterns. Mainstream archaeology says they used hammerstones, rounded river rocks made of even harder stone. Hours upon hours of chipping, smoothing, polishing, but then you get up close to the stones and things start to feel. Some of the blocks have precision-drilled holes, evenly spaced as if by a modern power tool. Others are shaped into H-blocks, with recesses and grooves that look like they came off an industrial assembly line. Stack a few together, and they fit like Lego. Historians still argue whether these stones were carved in place, or transported here. The quarry is miles away, across rough terrain. No roads, no carts, no pack animals. Some stones are so massive that modern cranes would struggle to lift them, and yet, they're here, lined up in a way that suggests not chaos but careful planning. Now here's your quirky tidbit. One theory suggests that the Tiwanaku didn't carve the stones, they poured them. Yes, poured them, like concrete. A few researchers argue that the stone might be a kind of reconstituted geopolymer, ground up and mixed with a binding agent to make a pourable slurry, molded instead of chiseled. It's not mainstream science yet, but experiments have shown it's possible, and it would explain the uniformity. Still, there's no direct evidence, no molds found, no chemical traces that confirm artificial stone, just speculation. But it lingers because, well, nothing else quite explains the mechanical neatness, even with hammerstones and patience. Matching the level of symmetry at Puma Punku would be a feat today. So how did they do it? The site's alignment adds more questions. Like many ancient complexes, it appears to be astronomically calibrated. Some doorways align with solstices, or stellar events. Not random, not accidental. The Tiwanaku seem to have built with both precision and cosmic intent. They were sky watchers, stonemasons, and likely mathematicians all in one. And here's where things drift into fringe territory. Some claim that Puma Punku was a power center, literally, that the shapes carved into the blocks were part of an energy grid. Not electricity in our modern sense, but something else, vibration, resonance, perhaps some form of earth energy. Others suggest the blocks were part of a sound-based construction system, where frequencies helped move or shape the stone. There's no real proof, of course, but these ideas persist because the site itself refuses to offer simpler answers. Then there's the issue of erosion. Some geologists argue that parts of the site show weathering that could be thousands of years older than the commonly accepted date of construction. That would place the site's origins deep into prehistory. before organized civilizations were supposed to exist in the Americas. If true, that would blow a hole in our timeline, big enough to roll a 100-ton block through. But let's pull back from the fringe and focus on what we do know. The Tiwanaku were clearly masters of their environment. They farmed at high altitudes, engineered raised fields to trap heat and protect crops from frost, and built an empire that lasted centuries. Pumapunku may be mysterious, but it didn't appear out of nowhere. It was part of a complex, thoughtful culture that was both deeply spiritual and technically savvy. And maybe that's what makes Pumapunku so unsettling. It's not just the sharp corners and massive stones, it's the feeling that someone long ago figured out a system we can't quite replicate. Whether it was lost knowledge, trial and error, or just sheer genius, it leaves us with stone puzzles that don't erode, not in form and not in mystery. So the next time you see a crumbling wall and think, well, that's just old stuff, remember this. In the mountains of Bolivia, someone once carved stone like it was butter, stacked blocks like they were playing Tetris, and left us a message we still can't read. Maybe it was religion, maybe it was engineering, maybe it was both. But it was brilliant. And it's still here, daring us to understand. Now we descend into the sweltering sands of Egypt again, back to Saqqara, the sprawling ancient necropolis that predates even the Great Pyramids. You're standing near the step pyramid of Djoser, surrounded by low ruins, half-buried courtyards, and scorching sun. It all looks like standard ancient architecture at first glance. But if you poke around a little deeper, specifically under one of the stone courtyards, you'll find something bizarre, a deep vertical shaft over 100 feet straight down, perfectly squared, plunging into the earth like a forgotten elevator shaft, to nowhere. This is the mystery shaft of Saqqara. And unlike most things in Egyptian archaeology, we don't really know what it was for. It's too deep to be practical, too square to be natural, and too neatly finished to be a collapsed mistake. At the bottom, a network of tunnels and empty chambers, some unfinished, some sealed, some looted in antiquity. But the shaft itself, just a massive vertical drop. Like someone started digging a mine shaft and then thought, never mind. Mainstream Egyptologists call it a serdab, a kind of tomb-related chamber, or possibly a ventilation shaft for underground galleries. Others think it was a symbolic passage, a route for the soul of the king to ascend, or descend, to the underworld. But here's the problem. It doesn't go to any burial chamber. It doesn't ventilate anything. It doesn't line up with star paths, or sacred geometry. It just goes down, and then branches off. Like a keyhole, without a door. The shaft sits beneath the south court of Djoser's Step Pyramid, the oldest large-scale stone building in the world, built over 4,600 years ago. This pyramid complex was a marvel of early engineering. Its builder, Imhotep, was a genius, architect, priest, maybe even physician. But even he doesn't explain what's going on down that shaft. One theory suggests it was a symbolic well of creation. In Egyptian mythology, the world began from a primordial mound, rising from watery chaos. The shaft might represent that chaos, the abyss below the earth mirroring the myth. Nice theory, except they dug 100 feet to make a metaphor. Here's your quirky tidbit. A few researchers noted that the walls of the shaft are smoother than expected for something dug so deep. Not polished, exactly, but strangely uniform. Not like natural collapse or erosion. Some even claim there are faint traces of tool marks that don't match the standard copper chisels of the time, which fuels the fringe idea that the shaft wasn't dug, but somehow bored, like with a massive ancient drill. And no one has found the drill, or the energy source, or the user manual. Historians still argue whether the shaft was originally meant for burial at all. Some think it was a decoy, a fake tomb designed to distract tomb robbers from the real burial chamber. Others believe it was part of a ritual descend into the underworld, wander its tunnels, emerge enlightened. Problem is, there's no evidence anyone ever used it that way. It's just a hole. A big, dark, pointless hole. Oh, and the acoustics are weird. Drop a stone down there, and it doesn't echo the way you expect. Some visitors say it sounds, off, like the sound gets swallowed. One fringe theory suggests the shaft was part of a sound-based ritual chanting or drumming that resonated down into the earth, or up. Maybe it was a speaker to the gods, or an amplifier for the dead. Either way, it makes you look twice at that blank shaft and think, someone built this on purpose. Let's not forget where it is. Saqqara isn't just old, it's ancient, even for ancient Egypt. It's where the pharaohs started getting serious about death. The step pyramid itself isn't just a big tomb, it's a stacked set of mastabas, or burial benches. A multi-level model of the afterlife. Maybe the shaft was part of that idea. Maybe you weren't just buried, you were launched into the next world, like a soul missile. A symbolic plunge into the earth before rebirth into eternity. But here's the problem. There are other shafts at Saqqara. Some are shallower, some are deeper, some go nowhere, some go everywhere. There's no consistent pattern, and that drives archaeologists crazy. You can't decode a system when it looks like the builders were making it up as they went. And just to keep things spicy, some of the lower tunnels are flooded now, thanks to rising groundwater, which means there could be sealed chambers, artifacts, or entire subterranean networks that no one has reached in modern times. Everything below waterline is pure speculation, which is how conspiracy theories happen. But also how real discoveries get missed. So here we are. A perfectly cut shaft in the middle of the oldest pyramid complex in the world. No clear purpose, no clear destination. Just a massive question mark in stone, older than most languages. Did it serve a ritual? A symbolic journey? Was it a test? A trap? A cosmic elevator that never got installed? Whatever the original intention, the shaft at Saqqara remains a riddle sunk deep into the bones of ancient Egypt. A feature too elaborate to ignore, too empty to explain, and too old to solve with certainty. And it's still down there, quietly waiting, in the dark. Now we set sail into the icy North Atlantic, following ancient wooden ships steered not by compasses, but by something far stranger, sunstones. According to sagas and scattered historical fragments, Viking navigators may have used a crystal to locate the sun, even on cloudy days, giving them a navigational edge centuries before the invention of the magnetic compass. Sounds like mythology, right? Except modern scientists have tested the theory, and it might actually work. First, a bit of context. Viking voyages weren't short joyrides. These people crossed oceans in open boats, navigating between Scandinavia, Iceland, Greenland, and even North America, long before Columbus ever thought about sailing west. They had no maps, no GPS, no sextants, but they did have stories. One such tale describes a sunstone that could reveal the sun's position, even in fog or after sunset. For years, scholars dismissed it as poetic metaphor. Then came the experiments. Enter Iceland's spar, a transparent crystal made of calcite. When you look through it, you see a double image that's called birefringence, and it messes with the way light travels through the crystal. By rotating the stone and watching the alignment of the images, you can pinpoint the direction of polarized light, which, as it turns out, changes depending on the sun's position in the sky. Even when the sun itself is hidden, historians still argue whether Vikings actually used these stones at sea, or if it was just a land-based trick. No actual sunstone has ever been recovered from a Viking shipwreck or burial. But the physics works. In fact, one modern study recreated a sunstone-based compass and found it could determine solar direction with surprising accuracy, within a few degrees, even during cloudy conditions. Here's your quirky tidbit. In 2013, a crystal similar to Iceland's spar was discovered aboard a 16th century English shipwreck near the Channel Islands. That's long after the Viking era, but it suggests the trick might have survived, or been rediscovered, longer than anyone thought. Now there are limits. Sunstones don't point to true north, they point to the sun. So you'd still need a mental map of where the sun should be, at a given hour and time of year. That means this wasn't just about waving a rock at the sky. It required astronomical knowledge, memory, and constant adjustments. But for seasoned sailors with a deep connection to the rhythms of nature, it could have made all the difference. And here's the mystery. If sunstones worked so well, why didn't the technique spread? Why don't we hear about them in other seafaring cultures? Why did the method vanish instead of evolving into something more refined? Some suggest it was too intuitive, more art than science. Viking navigation relied heavily on feel, the color of the water, the sound of waves against the hull, the flight paths of birds. The sunstone might have been one tool among many, useful but not critical, and easily forgotten once magnetic compasses became widespread in the later Middle Ages. Others believed the knowledge was deliberately secret. Navigation was power. If your clan knew how to sail blind and arrive safely while others got lost or drowned, you had an edge. Militarily, economically, even spiritually, you guarded that knowledge, passed it down orally, hid the tools until eventually they disappeared into legend. Then again, maybe there's more we haven't found. Viking sites are still being uncovered. Ship burials, settlements, tools. Maybe one day, someone will unearth a crystal tucked into the folds of a leather pouch, with wear patterns matching years of careful use. Until then, we're left with sagas, scattered clues, and one very clever rock. The idea that Vikings had semi-secret optical tech is exactly the kind of historical whiplash we love. It reminds us that ancient people weren't stumbling around in ignorance. They were experimenting, observing, testing. They didn't need to explain light polarization to use it, they just needed results. So imagine this. You're a Viking sailor, wrapped in furs, fog thick around your knuckles. The sea heaves. The sky is a blank wall of grey. You reach into your belt and pull out a chunk of translucent crystal. You hold it up, turn it slowly, and somewhere in that shimmer, you see it, the hidden sun. Not because of magic, because someone somewhere figured out how to read light like a book. Now we head south, to the heart of southern Africa, to the ruins of Great Zimbabwe, a vast, mysterious stone city that once housed tens of thousands, but left behind no written records, no blueprints, and no explanations for how it was built or why it was abandoned. Towering stone walls wind in elegant curves, dry stacked without mortar, some rising over 30 feet high, and they're still standing, even after centuries of storms, earthquakes, and neglect. Not a single drop of cement holding them together, just balance, geometry, and quiet brilliance. First, some orientation. Great Zimbabwe was the capital of a powerful kingdom that flourished between the 11th and 15th centuries. It was a hub of trade, connected to the Swahili coast, India, China, and Arabia. Gold, ivory, and other precious goods flowed through its stone gates. But for years, colonial historians refused to believe that local Africans could have built such a complex site. That's a whole separate tragedy. Thankfully, modern archaeology has long since corrected that myth. Yes, this was a sub-Saharan African civilization, and yes, they were master builders. The walls are built using granite blocks, carefully cut and stacked in interlocking patterns that are both decorative and structurally genius. There's no filler, no glue, just stones hugging each other tightly, resisting time through friction and clever placement. The outer curves aren't random either, they follow the natural terrain, flexing with the hills instead of fighting them, like the builders understood not just engineering but how to work with the land instead of against it. Mainstream fact. This place wasn't just a fort or temple, it was a living city. Archaeological digs have uncovered pottery, iron tools, coins from as far as China and Persia, and remnants of massive trade networks. At its peak, up to 20,000 people lived in and around the site, and yet, there's no central palace, no throne room, no obvious sign of a king's residence, just towering stone enclosures, narrow passageways, and one of the most puzzling towers in archaeology, a great conical structure over 30 feet tall, solid all the way through, serving no clear function. Historians still argue what this tower was for. Was it a granary? A symbol of power? A religious monument? Its smooth taper and perfect symmetry make it stand out like a monument from another world. It doesn't contain anything. You can't climb it. You can't enter it. It just is, like a stone exclamation mark in the center of the ruins, daring someone to figure it out. Here's your quirky tidbit. One of the complex's most intriguing features is the acoustics. In certain parts of the great enclosure, you can whisper at one end and be heard clearly at the other. The stones don't just stand, they speak. Some think these effects were used in rituals or political ceremonies, letting a leader speak without shouting or appear to project their voice like magic. But there's something else odd: the absence of certain things. There are no inscriptions, no symbols, no writing system carved into stone. Not even graffiti, just silence, which has led some to argue that the builders had an oral culture so robust they never needed to write anything down. But it also means we have no idea what they called the place, what their leaders believed, or how they engineered the finer points of their construction. And here's a particularly mysterious point: we still don't know exactly how the granite blocks were cut. There are no surviving chisels or cutting tools found in large quantities at the site. Some have theorized they used fire and water, heating the rock with fire, then cracking it with cold water. It's plausible, it's old school, but it doesn't explain the polish and precision in some of the smoother surfaces. The layout of the city is also strange. There's no rigid grid, no obvious plan. Instead, the walls seem to wind organically, more like tree roots than city blocks. Some archaeologists think this reflects a spiritual worldview, an architecture of relationships, not rulers. The city flows with life, shaped by both the land and the people who inhabited it. Then, suddenly, it was abandoned. Around the 15th century, Great Zimbabwe was left behind. No fire, no conquest, no plague, just silence. Some say the local resources, wood, water, farmland, were stretched too thin. Others think trade routes shifted, making the city obsolete. There's even the theory that internal political struggles led to a quiet unraveling. But the stones stayed. Today, much of the site is still being excavated, still being decoded. And while the grandeur is obvious, the purpose isn't. This wasn't just a city, it was a cultural signal flare, a message in architecture. But the message was written in curves, not letters. So if you walk among those stone walls today, you're not just seeing ruins, you're walking inside a forgotten blueprint of how people once lived in harmony with stone, sky, and silence. No concrete, no cranes, just hands, stone, and memory. And somehow, it's still standing, whispering its unsolved riddle to anyone willing to listen. Now we're diving beneath the waves off the coast of Japan, near the island of Unaguni, where the seabed suddenly shifts from ordinary rock into something far stranger. Massive terraces appear, with flat platforms, right angles, and steps carved into submerged stone. Some divers see a sunken temple, others see a natural rock formation. But everyone agrees on one thing: it looks far too precise to be a coincidence. Discovered in 1986 by a local diver, the Yonaguni Monument quickly became one of the most controversial archaeological sites in the world. It's a series of massive stone formations, submerged about 25 meters below the surface. The central structure is over 150 meters long, with what appear to be terraces, staircases, ramps, and perfectly squared corners. There are even what some claim are columns, drainage channels, and a giant face carved into one side. Others insist it's just the power of pareidolia, our tendency to see patterns like faces in random shapes. Here's what's not in dispute: the geology is real. The stone is sandstone, and it splits naturally into flat plains and linear fractures. Coastal erosion can sometimes create eerily regular patterns, but the scale of Unaguni is hard to ignore. If you didn't know it was underwater, you might assume it was the base of a fortress, or a city plaza, or a stepped pyramid, half sunk by time. Mainstream geologists say the site is entirely natural, that underwater currents, earthquakes, and tectonic activity shaped the stone into the appearance of man-made structures. But there's one problem: some of the features don't quite fit natural explanations. For instance, there are carvings, lines, and grooves that seem to follow patterns, One section has what looks like a road or a trench running along it, perfectly straight. Another has a corner with 3 right angles in succession, something rarely produced by erosion. Historians still argue whether the site was ever above water during the time humans could have built anything on it. The last time sea levels were low enough to expose the Yonaguni monument was over 10,000 years ago, long before the rise of any known civilization capable of stone architecture. That's the wild part. If it was man-made, it would mean there was a highly organized society building monumental structures before the end of the last ice age. That's thousands of years before ancient Mesopotamia, Egypt or India had their first villages. Which brings us to your quirky tidbit. Nearby islands in Okinawa have ancient stone monuments, dolmens, shrines and stone circles that bear some resemblance to Yonaguni's layout. It's led some researchers to suggest the underwater structure was once part of a larger cultural complex, now mostly lost to rising seas and time. Others, of course, take it further. Fringe theories claim Yonaguni is part of a lost Pacific civilization, maybe Lemuria or Mu, one of those fictional Atlantis-type places that shows up in old myths and 19th century spiritualist writings. These ideas aren't supported by mainstream archaeology, but they remain stubbornly popular in documentaries with dramatic voiceovers and slow pans over diving footage. One researcher, Masaki Kimura, has spent decades studying the site. He believes it includes walls, roads, and even writing symbols carved into the rock. Critics say he's reading too much into natural formations, but even skeptics admit Yonaguni is just too weird to fully dismiss. Adding to the intrigue, the area is seismically active. The nearby Rokyu Trench is a geological hotspot. Earthquakes are common. Some scientists think an ancient earthquake might have collapsed parts of the monument, or alternatively exposed it by shifting seabed layers. That would explain the crisp edges and sudden drop-offs. Or maybe not, because no matter how you spin it, those right angles still sit there underwater, taunting us. And here's the thought that sticks with you. If Yonaguni really is natural, it's the most architectural-looking rock formation on the planet. If it's man-made, then it's evidence of a civilization so ancient that it completely resets what we thought we knew about human history. Either way, it's uncomfortable. Most divers describe the same sensation. You drop down through clear blue water, expecting coral or sand, and then bam, a massive stairway, silent and surreal. It feels abandoned, sacred, cold, even when the water's warm, like you're trespassing, like the stones remember something you don't. So, natural or not, the Yonaguni monument forces us to look again at the assumptions we make about the past, about the line between nature and human design, about what we might have lost to the sea, and about how much of our history might still be sleeping just below the surface. Now we head back into the parched sands of Egypt, deeper than ever before, chasing a legend that sounds more like ancient science fiction than archaeology. It's the story of a labyrinth. No, not a metaphorical one, a real one, a gigantic underground complex said to be larger and more bewildering than the pyramids themselves. The Lost Labyrinth of Hora. Herodotus, the Greek historian, visited Egypt around 450 BCE and claimed he saw it with his own eyes. According to him, it had 12 grand courts and 3,000 rooms, half above ground, half below, interconnected in ways that left him speechless. "I found it greater than words could tell," he wrote. That's not a guy known for understatement, and he wasn't alone. Other ancient writers like Strabo and Pliny the Elder also reference the labyrinth, placing it near the modern village of Hawara, south of Cairo, at the edge of the Fayum oasis. So what happened to it? That's the maddening part. Today there's little more than a dusty ruin, scattered blocks, and a few half-buried walls. Nothing that screams 3,000 rooms. But the deeper you look, the stranger it gets. In the 19th century, famed archaeologist Flinders Petrie excavated the site and concluded that most of the labyrinth had been dismantled, the stones quarried for other buildings, leaving only the foundations. He found vast amounts of rubble, thick stone flooring, and columns lying in a mess, suggesting something enormous once stood there. But no tunnels, no catacombs, No maze-like wonder. Just hints. Mainstream Egyptologists accept that a large temple complex existed at Hawara, possibly part of the mortuary temple of Amenemhat III, a pharaoh from the Middle Kingdom. They think the labyrinth was likely a grand surface structure, not the underground mystery described by Herodotus. But here's the thing. The ancient texts specifically mention underground chambers that no one was allowed to enter. Chambers said to contain sarcophagi, sacred texts, and unfathomable secrets. Historians still argue whether the descriptions were exaggerated or simply misunderstood. Maybe Herodotus was led through a hallway or two, dazzled by the scale, and invented the rest. Or maybe, and here's the fun part, what he saw is still underground, hidden beneath millennia of sand, water, and debris. Here's your quirky tidbit. In 2008, a team of researchers used ground-penetrating radar at Hawara. They scanned beneath the surface and found what appeared to be a massive grid of structures, corridors, chambers, and empty spaces that don't match the known layout above. The results weren't widely publicized, and no official excavation followed. But if they're accurate, the labyrinth might still be down there, untouched, unexplored, and very, very real. And this is where the frustration kicks in. Why not dig? Why not uncover what could be one of the greatest archaeological finds in history? The reasons are many. Political instability, conservation concerns, limited funding, even fears of groundwater flooding the site. But conspiracy theories have filled the gap. Some say authorities know what's down there and are keeping it secret. Others believe the labyrinth holds forbidden knowledge, ancient maps, lost sciences, technology older than the pyramids. Of course, there's no proof of that. But the idea persists because something about the labyrinth feels unfinished. It's one of those historical loose ends that refuses to tie itself up. And the more we wait, the more the sand covers it. One theory suggests the labyrinth was less a maze and more a coded structure, a giant symbolic layout mimicking cosmological principles, a stone model of the universe built to house the mysteries of life, death, and the stars. If so, every hallway, every room would have had purpose, not just function, but meaning. Like a sacred machine built from corridors and doorways, imagine walking into it. You take a few steps and already lose your sense of direction. The light fades. The air thickens. Every passage seems to lead somewhere and nowhere. You pass through chambers with strange acoustics, your footsteps echoing longer than they should. You feel watched, not by anything alive, but by the architecture itself. And just when you think you've understood the layout, the floor slopes downward, a hidden staircase, a sealed door, a chamber not on any map. Not all mazes are meant to be escaped. Some are built to hold things in. Whether it was a real building or just the fever dream of a few ancient tourists, the lost labyrinth of Hawara refuses to fade from the record. Too many hints, too many fragments, too much silence around something that was once described as the greatest wonder of Egypt. And maybe, just maybe, it's still down there, waiting. Beneath the sand, the stone, and the feet of farmers who don't even know they're walking above a forgotten marvel of the ancient world. Now we're crossing the Gulf of Mexico and stepping into the humid jungles of ancient Mesoamerica, where colossal stone faces stare out from the earth with expressions both serene and severe. These are the Olmec Heads monuments, as heavy as buses, carved from single basalt boulders and somehow transported across miles of dense terrain without wheels or beasts of burden. Their scale is staggering, but what's even stranger, they all face magnetic north. Not true north, magnetic. The Olmec civilization, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, thrived from around 1500 to 400 BCE. They gave us the first pyramids in the Americas, rubber balls for ritual games, and some of the earliest examples of written language in the region. But the heads, they're different. They're not temples. They're not symbols of gods. They're hyper-specific portraits, most likely of rulers. Each one unique, helmets, wide noses, intense eyes, real people, preserved in rock. Now here's where it gets weird. There are 17 known heads, scattered across what is now southern Mexico, and several of them are aligned consistently with Earth's magnetic field as it existed at the time of their creation. That detail wasn't discovered until the late 20th century, when researchers brought magnetometers to the sites, and they found that many heads are facing magnetic north, not geographic north, which shifts slightly over time. Historians still argue whether the Olmec knew what they were doing. Was it coincidence? Or did they have a way to detect magnetism? That would put them among the earliest humans to do so, predating the Chinese discovery of magnetite's compass-like properties by at least 1,000 years. And here's your quirky tidbit. One theory suggests they discovered magnetism by accident while polishing magnetite stones for mirrors or tools. Maybe one of those stones suddenly pulled iron filings from the dirt, and someone noticed. Maybe they used suspended needles or floating twigs. Or maybe they just felt it, an instinct, repeated across generations, codified into ritual or architectural rule. Some scholars believe the Olmec used magnetized iron ore not just for tools, but for ceremonial objects, including compass-like artifacts. One particularly controversial find, a bar-shaped magnetite piece, was shaped suspiciously like a primitive compass needle. It was found buried among other ritual items, suggesting it held some spiritual or practical value. Whether it was used for navigation or divination, though, remains uncertain. What's not uncertain is the technical challenge of building these heads. They were carved from basalt quarried in the Tuxtla Mountains up to 100 kilometers from their final resting places. No roads, no carts, just rivers, logs, muscle, and maybe a bit of genius. Some estimates say moving one head would have taken 1,500 people several months. Yet they did it, over and over again. And despite their size and weight, the heads weren't just dropped into place. They were arranged with precision, often part of larger ceremonial complexes. Their placement suggests they weren't just memorials but guardians, possibly embodying ancestral power or elite authority. Now, let's talk faces. Every head is different. The features vary: brows, lips, jawlines, but they all wear that same iconic helmet. Some think these were war helmets, others think they're part of a ritual costume, maybe tied to the ball game. Either way, they weren't anonymous figures. These were portraits, possibly rulers, elevated to stone. Which brings us back to the magnetic alignment. If these heads represented kings, and those kings were placed to face the shifting force of the earth itself, what does that say about how the Olmec saw power? Maybe magnetism wasn't just a physical force. It was symbolic. Maybe magnetic north was, to them, a direction of spiritual or cosmic significance. Something the living could feel or fear. There's also the question of what these heads were watching. Unlike other Mesoamerican monuments, the heads don't always face ceremonial centers or rising suns. They often face outward, as if guarding something, or warning, or simply remembering. It's hard not to imagine their stone eyes blinking once every century. The Olmec left no detailed texts. We can't read their thoughts, just shapes, alignments, and stone. But their ability to work with magnetism, intentionally or otherwise, hints at an understanding of nature that was deeper than we usually give them credit for. So next time you see a picture of one of those massive stone heads, don't just admire the carving, consider the possibility that its face is locked onto an invisible force, long before science gave it a name. Consider that in the jungle, long before steel or electricity, someone figured out how to listen to the Earth's hidden pulse, and carved a monument to stare straight into it. Now we're threading our way through the rugged slopes of the Andes, following the snaking remnants of a road system so vast and resilient, it still stitches together countries long after the empire that built it collapsed. These are the Quipapion, the royal roads of the Inca. Thousands of miles of stone paths, staircases, tunnels and rope bridges that stretch from Colombia to Chile, across mountains, deserts, and jungles. And somehow, with no cement and no wheels, these roads haven't cracked, haven't washed away, The Inca Empire had no written language, no carts, and no pack animals capable of hauling loads with wheels. But they built roads, not dirt tracks. Roads, paved, graded, sometimes carved right into the rock face. The system was over 24,000 miles long, rivaling Roman roads in complexity and scale, and it's still there, not under glass in museums, still in use, still walkable, still making modern engineers look twice and go, wait, they did what? What's astonishing is how these roads were designed. The Incas didn't flatten the landscape, they worked with it. When faced with mountains, they didn't go around, they went up. Steep stone steps, built into cliffs, switchbacks zigzagging across impossible slopes. In wetlands, they built raised causeways. In the desert, they lined the roads with stone to keep sand from swallowing them. In earthquake zones, they laid flexible foundations that allowed the roads to shift without breaking. Mainstream historians agree, this wasn't just infrastructure, it was imperial glue. The roads connected far-flung regions of the empire, allowing armies, messengers, traders and taxes to flow like blood through veins. The Incas had relay runners, or chesquis, stationed every few miles. A message could travel hundreds of miles in a single day, faster than the Pony Express, centuries before horses arrived in the Americas. Historians still argue whether the road-building knowledge came entirely from the Inca, or if they inherited parts of it from earlier cultures like the Wari. The Incas were empire builders, after all. They absorbed techniques, improved them, then expanded on a scale nobody had attempted before. Here's your quirky tidbit. The Incas built rope bridges out of grass, actual grass. They'd twist and braid it into cables thick enough to support entire caravans. These suspension bridges could span canyons hundreds of feet deep, and they were rebuilt annually by local communities in a ceremonial event that was part engineering, part festival. One of them, the Kiswashika Bridge, still exists today, still gets rebuilt every year, still holds people. And here's the kicker, the Inca roads have outlasted modern ones. In some parts of Peru, old Inca trails are in better shape than nearby 20th century roads. No potholes, no erosion, just quiet, unwavering stones, still holding their line after 500 years of earthquakes, floods, and footsteps. So how did they do it? The answer seems to be attention to detail. Roads were built with multiple layers, gravel for drainage, flat stones for the surface, side walls to hold everything together. They weren't uniform. Inca engineers adapted each stretch to the terrain. In the jungle, they used logs. In the highlands, tightly fitted stones. No cookie-cutter design, just constant observation and adaptation. And yet it wasn't just practical. The roads also had spiritual meaning. They connected sacred sites, or wakas, and formed part of the Incas' larger vision of a cosmos tied together by pathways. Roads didn't just move people, they moved power. Priests walked them, runners carried quipu, knotted cords that stored information like spreadsheets made of string. And along the way, shrines, way stations, and administrative centers turned the network into something halfway between an empire and a living circuit board. Then, the Spanish came. The empire collapsed. The road system, amazingly, did not. In fact, some Spanish expeditions used the same roads to conquer the empire that built them, and later, when railroads and highways came along, they often followed the same routes, because the Incas had already figured out the best way through the mountains. And yet, despite their durability, the roads are still fragile. Development, mining, and climate change threaten what's left. The UNESCO World Heritage designation helps, but many stretches are still being discovered. In remote areas covered by moss, forgotten by maps, they lie waiting, footpaths of history, hidden in the mist. So if you ever find yourself walking an old stone trail high in the Andes, know this, you're not just on a path, you're walking inside a machine. One built by hands, without engines, without steel, without blueprints. A road that doesn't just lead to places, it connects lives, past and present, and it's still working, just the way the Incas designed it. We return once more to Egypt, to the vast step pyramid complex at Saqqara, where beneath the blazing sun lies one of the most puzzling architectural features of the ancient world. a deep, perfectly vertical shaft carved straight down into the earth. This shaft plunges over 100 feet, around 30 meters, its walls smoothed with astonishing precision, and leads to an underground network of chambers and tunnels that continue to baffle archaeologists, Egyptologists, and enthusiasts alike. Unlike the straightforward burial shafts found in many tombs, this mysterious vertical shaft doesn't seem to serve any obvious practical function. It doesn't ventilate anything, nor does it lead to a known burial chamber or treasure. Instead, it descends into an empty void, branching off into corridors and passageways that remain largely unexplored. This is the mystery shaft of Saqqara. Saqqara itself is the sprawling necropolis that served as a burial ground for the ancient city of Memphis, one of Egypt's earliest capitals. The step pyramid of Djoser, constructed around 2650 BCE, was the first large-scale cut-stone structure built by humans and stands as a testament to the ingenuity of Imhotep, the architect and polymath credited with its design. The pyramid complex is vast and multifaceted, including courtyards, temples, and subsidiary structures. Nestled within this complex is the enigmatic shaft, situated beneath the south court, which continues to tantalize and frustrate archaeologists. What purpose could such a deep, well-crafted vertical shaft have served? Several theories have been proposed, ranging from the practical to the spiritual and even the supernatural. The simplest explanation posited by mainstream Egyptologists is that the shaft was some kind of symbolic or ritualistic feature. Perhaps it was a symbolic passage to the underworld, a spiritual tunnel through which the soul of the deceased pharaoh might journey after death. Ancient Egyptian cosmology was rich with ideas about the afterlife, the journey of the soul, and the connections between earth and sky, life and death. The shaft could be an architectural representation of the primordial abyss, the watery chaos from which the world was believed to have emerged. Supporting this, some scholars suggest the shaft might have been designed to mimic the cosmic underground, or the realm of Osiris, the god of the dead, and thus form part of the pyramid's function as a resurrection machine. But even so, the sheer scale and depth of the shaft, combined with its meticulous craftsmanship, raise questions. Why would the Egyptians invest so much effort in digging a shaft that doesn't connect to a tomb or contain any offerings or artifacts? Why such precision in carving the walls so smoothly if it wasn't intended to be used regularly or practically? Then there are the more practical hypotheses. Some researchers have suggested the shaft functioned as a ventilation system for the underground chambers, allowing fresh air to circulate. However, its depth and narrowness seem counterproductive for effective ventilation, especially when compared with other known air shafts in pyramids, which are much shorter and designed specifically to provide airflow. Others propose it was a decoy tomb, intended to mislead grave robbers, a false chamber to protect the real burial site hidden elsewhere. Ancient Egyptians were no strangers to elaborate measures to protect the pharaoh's remains and treasures from looters, and such deception fits within known practices. Yet again, no sign of treasure or funerary goods has ever been found in the shaft or its tunnels. The walls themselves are peculiar. They are unusually smooth for something dug so deep in an era before iron tools. Copper chisels, the primary cutting tools at the time, were soft and inefficient for cutting hard limestone with such precision. Some fringe theories suggest the shaft might have been bored using some form of advanced tool or lost technology, far beyond the capabilities attributed to the Old Kingdom Egyptians. While there is no direct archaeological evidence supporting this, the perfectly squared edges and consistent dimensions make the shaft stand out from other similar features in Egyptian tombs. Some enthusiasts have even speculated that the shaft was part of an ancient energy or sound system, designed to harness natural acoustics or vibrations. In other ancient cultures, caves and shafts were used as resonating chambers, where chanting or drumming could produce altered states of consciousness or communicate with the divine. It is conceivable that this deep shaft could have been employed similarly, though there is no concrete evidence to support such an idea. The suggestion remains an intriguing possibility that blurs the line between archaeology and ritualistic speculation. To add to the mystery, acoustics experiments conducted in the shaft have yielded strange results. When objects or sounds are introduced into the shaft, echoes and reverberations behave unusually, Some sounds seem to be absorbed or muffled in ways inconsistent with a typical limestone chamber. This has led some to theorize that the shaft was intentionally designed to manipulate sound for ritualistic purposes, possibly to simulate the journey of the soul through the underworld, or to connect with unseen realms. The shaft also connects to a network of tunnels and chambers, many of which remain unexplored due to safety concerns and flooding from rising groundwater levels. The presence of water is a modern problem, but it adds to the challenge of understanding the structure's full extent and purpose. Some passages appear deliberately sealed or collapsed, perhaps to prevent entry or to protect the sanctity of the space. The possibility remains that undiscovered chambers hold more clues, ancient inscriptions, artifacts, or funerary treasures that could shed light on the shaft's true function. Another line of thought links the shaft to the Egyptian obsession with rebirth and cosmic cycles. The verticality of the shaft mirrors the axis mundi, the cosmic axis connecting the heavens, earth, and underworld, a concept central to many ancient cultures. Descending into the depths could symbolize a spiritual death, with eventual ascent representing resurrection or transformation. The shaft might have been a physical embodiment of this cosmic journey, a passageway through which the pharaoh's Ka spirit traveled after death to reunite with the gods. Yet the unanswered questions multiply. Why would such a monumental and precise shaft remain so unused? Why no artifacts, no burial chambers, no hieroglyphs, offering insight? Could it have been left incomplete, or deliberately constructed as an architectural enigma? Could it be that the shaft's significance was not practical or funerary, but esoteric, an invisible thread woven into the fabric of Egyptian cosmology, intentionally inaccessible to all but the initiated? Stepping back, the shaft at Saqqara epitomizes the tantalizing paradox of Egyptology, a civilization with stunning architectural and engineering mastery that still guards its deepest secrets beneath layers of stone and sand. Despite millennia of study, modern archaeologists face a void as dark and profound as the shaft itself, a reminder that even the oldest and best-studied cultures still hold mysteries that defy explanation. For visitors today standing at the edge of that vast vertical hole, it's hard not to feel a chill. The silence, the shadow, the smooth limestone walls stretching downward into darkness. These evoke something ancient and powerful, something built not just of stone but of belief, imagination, and cosmic longing. In the end, the mystery shaft at Saqqara is a journey without a clear destination, a testament to the limits of our knowledge and the depths of ancient Egyptian spirituality. It reminds us that some passages are meant to remain unexplored, their true meaning buried beneath the sands, waiting for future generations brave or curious enough to seek the light at the bottom. We leave the ancient Egyptian deserts and sail north into the cold, foggy waters of Scandinavia, where the Vikings once ruled the seas and forged a reputation for both ferocity and incredible navigation skills. Long before magnetic compasses became common, Viking sailors faced a daunting problem: how to find their way across the open ocean when the sun vanished behind thick clouds or dipped below the horizon during the long Arctic winter. According to sagas and scattered historical hints, the Vikings may have used a mysterious tool known as the sunstone, a crystal that could locate the sun even on overcast days, a natural compass of sorts, enabling them to navigate where no one else could. Let's unpack this a bit. The Vikings were expert seafarers, crossing hundreds of miles of open ocean in wooden longships that were light, fast, and nimble, but lacked any modern navigation tools. Their journeys to Iceland, Greenland, and even the North American coast required exceptional skill. Written records and sagas mention sunstones used for navigation, but for centuries scholars thought this was poetic or symbolic language. Then, in the late 20th century, scientists began testing crystals like Iceland spar, a naturally occurring calcite crystal known for its unique optical properties called birefringence. When you look through Iceland spar, you see two offset images of whatever you're viewing. By rotating the crystal and observing these double images, one can detect the polarization of light, that is, the orientation of light waves. And polarization patterns in the sky depend on the sun's position, even when the sun is hidden behind clouds or fog. Experiments have shown that with Iceland spar, You can deduce the sun's location with reasonable accuracy, even under overcast conditions, or twilight. Historians still argue about how widespread this technique was. No actual Viking sunstones have been found in archaeological digs, though some crystals matching the description have appeared in sites dated to the Viking Age. Some scholars suggest the sunstone was used more as a ritual or symbolic object, while others believe it was a practical tool carried in sailors' pockets. Navigation using such stones required significant skill and knowledge of the sun's movements throughout the year. Here's your quirky tidbit. In 2013, a crystal resembling Iceland's spar was discovered aboard a 16th century English shipwreck near the Channel Islands, long after the Viking Age had ended. This suggests the use or knowledge of polarized light navigation may have persisted or been rediscovered later, underscoring how ingenious and far-reaching this technique might have been. But it wasn't a perfect system. The sunstone method required knowing roughly the time of day and date, as the sky's polarization pattern shifts throughout the day and seasons. Sailors had to mentally calibrate their readings and compensate for errors, making this an art as much as a science. Still, in a world without compasses or sextants, this was revolutionary. Some suggest the technique was kept secret among navigators, part of the closely guarded maritime knowledge that gave Vikings their edge. Others think it was more widespread but lost as magnetic compasses became dominant in the late Middle Ages. After all, the magnetic compass is easier to use, doesn't require clear skies, and doesn't demand much interpretation. Imagine a Viking sailor wrapped against the biting sea wind, the sky a blanket of grey. The sun is nowhere to be seen, but in his hand he holds a small crystal. Turning it slowly, through the double images he finds the hidden sun's direction and steers true toward Iceland or Greenland. It's a tiny piece of nature turned into a lifeline, a compass made not of metal, but of light itself. The sunstone remains a fascinating glimpse into ancient innovation, a reminder that our ancestors found ways to read the sky's secrets without modern instruments. It's a mystery wrapped in crystal, simple yet profound, lost yet rediscovered, and it leaves us wondering, what other natural tools did the ancients use, quietly guiding the course of history, hidden in plain sight? We turn now to the vast plains and rocky hills of southern Africa, home to one of the continent's most enduring and impressive ancient cities, Great Zimbabwe. This sprawling stone metropolis, built between the 11th and 15th centuries CE, stands as a testament to the engineering genius of a civilization that flourished without the use of mortar, metal tools, or wheeled vehicles. Its massive walls curve gracefully across the landscape, some towering over 30 feet tall, constructed from thousands of precisely cut granite blocks, and perhaps the most baffling aspect, these walls have stood for centuries, defying time, weather, and human interference, their builders' techniques still not fully understood. Great Zimbabwe was the heart of a prosperous kingdom that controlled the rich trade networks stretching from the interior of Africa to the Indian Ocean coast. Gold, ivory, and exotic goods passed through its gates, bringing wealth and power. The city's architecture reflects this importance, with complex enclosures, towers, and elaborate stonework that symbolize political and spiritual authority. Mainstream archaeologists agree that Great Zimbabwe was built by indigenous African peoples, finally dispelling earlier colonial myths that dismissed the site's creators. But the exact methods of construction remain elusive. The stones were quarried locally and transported without wheels or draft animals, relying instead on human labor and ingenuity. The walls were assembled dry, no mortar, yet their interlocking placement provides remarkable stability and resilience. Historians still debate the function of the iconic conical tower within the great enclosure. Its smooth taper and height suggest symbolic or ritual significance rather than practical use, perhaps serving as a grain storage facility or a marker of royal power. Its precise purpose remains unknown, adding to the city's aura of mystery. One particularly fascinating feature of Great Zimbabwe is its acoustic design. Certain areas within the enclosures amplify whispers or voices, allowing a speaker to communicate across considerable distances without shouting. Such effects may have played a role in ceremonies or governance, enhancing the sense of power and connection within the city. The city's layout itself, defies simple categorization. Rather than rigid grids, the walls and structures flow organically with the terrain, reflecting a worldview that embraced harmony with the natural environment. This architectural fluidity contrasts sharply with contemporary European or Asian cities, showcasing a unique approach to urban design. Some scholars have noted that the cutting techniques for the granite blocks achieved a level of precision comparable to other great ancient civilizations, yet without the use of iron tools, which raises questions about the technologies and skills developed by Great Zimbabwe's builders. Today, Great Zimbabwe remains a UNESCO World Heritage Site, yet much of its history and construction techniques await full understanding. Its stones stand as silent witnesses to a culture whose mastery of stone and space continues to inspire wonder. Walking among its ancient walls, one feels connected to a civilization that achieved greatness through knowledge, labor, and profound cultural expression. Great Zimbabwe is not just ruins, it is a living legacy of human innovation that challenges assumptions and invites us to rethink Africa's place in the story of ancient technology. Beneath the turquoise waters off the coast of Yonaguni, Japan, lies a submerged mystery that blurs the lines between nature and human ingenuity. The Yonaguni Monument, discovered in 1986, is a vast underwater formation composed of massive terraces, stepped platforms, and sharp-edged blocks that resemble the foundations of a lost city. Some call it the Atlantis of the Pacific, while others insist it's nothing more than an extraordinary natural formation shaped by tectonic forces and erosion. The debate rages on because the site is simply too precise, too structured, to dismiss outright. The monument stretches over 150 meters long and includes features that look like staircases, roads, and even a carved face. Its massive sandstone blocks show signs of sharp edges and flat surfaces that hint at deliberate shaping, not random geological fracturing. Yet the stone itself is sandstone, a material prone to erosion, which complicates the story of its preservation over millennia. Mainstream geologists argue that the formations result from natural processes, earthquakes, fracturing, wave action, that can create straight lines and terraces. They point out that many similar features exist elsewhere underwater without human involvement. Yet the complexity of the Yonaguni structure, including apparent right angles and perfectly aligned edges, defies typical natural explanations. Historians and archaeologists remain divided. Some suggest that during the last ice age, when sea levels were much lower, the monument may have stood above water, serving as a ceremonial or administrative center for a prehistoric culture now lost to time. If true, it could rewrite our understanding of human civilization's timeline in the region, pushing back the origins of advanced construction thousands of years earlier than currently accepted. A fringe theory proposes that the monument was part of a vast, ancient civilization, possibly linked to mythic lost continents like Lemuria or Mu, now submerged due to rising sea levels or catastrophic earthquakes. These ideas, though lacking direct evidence, capture the imagination and underscore the monument's enigmatic nature. Diving at the site, explorers report a profound silence and eerie stillness. The scale and layout evoke a sense of intentional design, a cityscape frozen in stone and sea. Whether natural or man-made, the Yonaguni Monument challenges assumptions about the boundaries of ancient human capability and the secrets hidden beneath the waves. In the end, Yonaguni stands as a submerged puzzle, an invitation to look closer, to question what we know, and to remember that sometimes history lies not just in dusty ruins, but beneath the depths of oceans, waiting silently to be rediscovered. Deep in the sands of Egypt's vast desert, near the oasis of Fayum, lies the site of Hawara, home to one of the most elusive and enigmatic structures ever described by ancient historians, the Lost Labyrinth. According to accounts from Herodotus and later classical writers, the Labyrinth of Hawara was a sprawling, multi-level complex, larger and more intricate than any pyramid or temple. It was said to contain thousands of rooms, vast courtyards, underground passages, and chambers filled with sacred knowledge, tombs, and possibly treasures. Yet today, all that remains is a scattering of ruined walls and fragments, and a haunting absence that invites endless speculation. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, described the labyrinth as surpassing in size and splendor all other works of man. He spoke of 12 covered courts with 3,000 rooms, half above and half below ground, interconnected by corridors so complex that few outsiders could navigate them without getting lost. The labyrinth was thought to be the funerary temple of Amenemhat III, a Middle Kingdom pharaoh, renowned for his architectural projects. Despite these glowing descriptions, modern archaeologists have struggled to locate the full extent of the labyrinth. Early excavations in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, led by Flinders Petrie and others, uncovered only fragments, foundations, blocks and collapsed walls, suggesting a monumental structure once stood here, but has since been dismantled or destroyed. Many stones were removed and repurposed in later buildings, erasing much of the labyrinth's physical presence. Historians still debate whether Herodotus's description was accurate or exaggerated. Some propose that the labyrinth was a grand temple complex with ceremonial significance rather than a true maze. Others believe the underground sections may have been sealed or flooded, hiding their true nature from modern eyes. In recent years, ground-penetrating radar surveys revealed subsurface anomalies, patterns resembling corridors and chambers beneath the surface, suggesting remnants of the labyrinth might still lie buried, waiting to be uncovered. Unfortunately, political instability, flooding, and preservation concerns have slowed excavation efforts. The labyrinth has long captured imaginations, inspiring tales of secret knowledge, hidden treasures, and ancient technologies lost to time. Some fringe theories speculate that it housed advanced mechanical devices, or secret archives of knowledge beyond our understanding. While these ideas remain speculative, they underscore the labyrinth's aura of mystery. Standing near Hawara today, one can almost feel the echoes of footsteps long gone, the whispers of ancient rituals, and the tantalizing promise of secrets buried beneath the shifting sands. The lost labyrinth remains a testament to human ambition, a monument to complexity, mystery, and the unknown depths of history. We travel now to the lush tropical heart of Mesoamerica, to the land once ruled by the Olmec, the so-called mother culture of the Americas, and their most enduring legacy, the colossal stone heads. These massive sculptures, carved from single basalt boulders weighing up to 40 tons, were created between 100 and 400 BCE, and are scattered across southern Mexico's Veracruz and Tabasco regions. Each head is strikingly unique, portraying individuals with broad faces, fleshy lips, and distinctive helmets, or headgear. But their creation, transport, and precise positioning reveal a level of technological and cultural sophistication that still puzzles scholars today. The heads were carved from basalt quarried from the Tuxtla Mountains, some 50 to 100 kilometers away from their final resting places. Without the wheel or draft animals, the Olmec transported these stones over rough terrain using rafts, rollers, and human power. An extraordinary feat of logistics and communal effort. The head's size and weight made them impossible to move casually, indicating a society capable of organizing large-scale projects and coordinating complex labor forces. Mainstream archaeologists recognize the heads as portraits of Olmec rulers, or significant figures, but their magnetic alignment adds a fascinating twist. Many of the heads face roughly magnetic north, not true north, a detail that suggests the Olmec had an awareness of Earth's magnetic field long before compasses were invented elsewhere. Whether this alignment was intentional or coincidental remains debated, but it hints at early knowledge of magnetism. Some researchers propose that the Olmec might have used naturally magnetized stones as rudimentary compasses, aiding in aligning their monuments and perhaps navigation. A few magnetite artifacts resembling compass needles have been found, although their purpose is not definitively established. Here's your quirky tidbit: the helmets worn by many of the heads are thought by some to represent protective gear worn during ritual ball games, a central part of Olmec and later Mesoamerican culture. The ball game itself was not just sport, but a symbolic battle between cosmic forces, tying the heads to religious and political power. The craftsmanship is equally remarkable. Despite the hardness of basalt, the Olmec sculptors achieved smooth surfaces, detailed facial features, and symmetrical proportions using only stone tools. Their techniques likely involved pecking, grinding, and polishing, requiring both patience and skilled artistry. The heads were not isolated statues. They were often positioned near ceremonial centers, sometimes accompanied by smaller sculptures and altars. Their placement may have served as territorial markers or as expressions of dynastic legitimacy and ancestral worship. Historians still debate whether the Olmec had a formal system for measuring and planning their constructions, or if their precision came from experience and tradition. Either way, the scale and sophistication of the heads underscore a society far more complex than once believed. So, standing before one of these stone giants today, you're face to face with an ancient individual, carved in volcanic rock, aligned with Earth's magnetic pulse, bearing the silent witness of a civilization that mastered stone, space, and power long before much of the world even left the Stone Age. We turn now to the rugged highlands of the Andes, where the Inca Empire constructed an extraordinary network of roads and bridges that spanned nearly 25,000 miles across some of the world's most challenging terrain. The Capac Ñan, as the Incas called their royal roads, linked the farthest reaches of their empire, from the deserts of Chile to the rainforests of Colombia, binding diverse cultures into a single political and economic system. Despite lacking wheels, draft animals capable of pulling carts, or written maps, the Incas built roads that not only survived earthquakes and floods, but remain usable today. What makes the Capac Ñan truly remarkable is how the Incas adapted their road-building techniques to the environment. Instead of forcing the landscape to conform, they built stairways up sheer cliffs, causeways across marshes, tunnels through mountains, and rope bridges spanning chasms, hundreds of feet wide. Their roads were paved with stones, carefully graded for drainage, and bordered by retaining walls that kept the paths stable for centuries. Mainstream historians highlight the administrative genius behind this network. The roads allowed rapid communication by relay runners known as chasquis, who could cover vast distances in a day, carrying quipu, knotted cords used to record information, and royal decrees. This system was the backbone of Inca governance and military power, enabling control over an empire of millions. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some of the rope bridges were made entirely from woven grass, expertly braided and twisted into cables capable of supporting dozens of people at once. These bridges were rebuilt annually in community ceremonies, emphasizing social cohesion as much as infrastructure maintenance. One famous bridge, Kiswashoka, is still rebuilt today, using traditional methods. The engineering of the roads also included early forms of earthquake resistance. In seismic zones, the Incas built flexible foundations with layers of gravel and sand that could absorb shaking, preventing collapse. This approach allowed their roads and retaining walls to survive some of the strongest earthquakes recorded in history, a testament to their empirical knowledge of geology. Historians debate whether the road network was an original Inca invention or an expansion of earlier Andean cultures' paths. Regardless, the Incas perfected and expanded it on an unprecedented scale. The roads facilitated trade, pilgrimage, and political integration, reinforcing the empire's cohesion. Despite the arrival of the Spanish and the subsequent collapse of the empire, many stretches of the Capac Ñan remain visible and walkable. Modern highways and railways often follow their ancient routes, underscoring the Incas' unparalleled mastery of their environment. Walking these stone paths today, one is walking in the footsteps of a civilization that transformed impossible mountains into a web of connection and control. Roads that weren't just for travel but arteries of empire, still beating strong after centuries. From the stone roads of the Andes, we journey back to Egypt's Nile Valley, where the ancient city of Alexandria once shone as a beacon of knowledge and mystery. Beneath the waves near the island of Pharos, the site of the famed lighthouse of Alexandria, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, lie ruins that have confounded archaeologists for decades. Among these submerged relics are massive stone blocks, columns, and statues, but also something far more intriguing: ancient hydraulic technology that was far ahead of its time. Built in the 3rd century BCE, the lighthouse was not only a navigational aid, but also a marvel of engineering. Standing over 100 meters tall, it guided sailors safely into one of the busiest harbors of the ancient Mediterranean. The lighthouse was constructed with massive limestone blocks held together without mortar, using precise interlocking joints that have helped some of its underwater remains survive earthquakes and centuries of seawater erosion. But the real mystery lies beneath the harbor, where underwater surveys have uncovered complex canal systems, docks, and possibly even ancient water pumps. These hydraulic installations appear to have been designed to regulate water flow, assist in ship docking, and manage silt accumulation. Some scholars suggest the presence of early water lifting devices, proto-siphons or chain pumps, that could raise water for irrigation or urban use. While mechanical water lifting technology was known in antiquity, the scale and sophistication of Alexandria's harbor hydraulics hint at a more advanced understanding than previously thought. Historians still debate the extent of the ancient engineers' knowledge. Were these water management systems purely functional, or did they incorporate principles that anticipated later developments in hydraulics and engineering? Did the lighthouse and harbor complex incorporate experimental technology to maintain one of the busiest ports in the ancient world? Here's your quirky tidbit. Some researchers believe the lighthouse's flame was fueled by a system of mirrors and lenses that concentrated sunlight during the day and amplified firelight at night, an ancient proto-optical system that maximized visibility for ships. This combination of hydraulic and optical innovation made Alexandria not just a city, but a hub of technological experimentation. Though the lighthouse was destroyed by earthquakes centuries ago, its ruins and the underwater harbor remain a tantalizing glimpse into a world where engineering, science, and art converged. They challenge our assumptions about the pace of technological progress, and remind us that some ancient cities were laboratories of innovation, pushing the boundaries of what was possible long before the industrial age. The underwater remains of Alexandria stand as a silent testament to human ingenuity, stone and water intertwined in a dance of survival, utility, and wonder, waiting patiently for future explorers to unlock their secrets. Now, we turn to the arid landscapes of Mesopotamia, cradle of civilization and home to one of the oldest urban centers, Uruk. Among its many astonishing achievements, the city holds a technological mystery that still perplexes historians: the development of early writing systems and the ingenious tools used to make them. The cuneiform script, etched into wet clay tablets with a simple reed stylus, revolutionized communication, record-keeping, and administration. But what's less discussed is the sophisticated understanding of materials and tools that made this possible. Around 300 and 200 BCE, scribes in Uruk began pressing wedge-shaped marks into soft clay, creating symbols representing words and sounds. This writing wasn't carved into stone or metal, it was pressed into clay tablets, which were then dried or baked to preserve the record. The stylus itself was simple, a pointed reed split at the tip to form a wedge shape, but the precision required to consistently produce clear marks hints at a highly developed craft tradition. Mainstream historians recognize cuneiform as the world's first writing system, but the leap from symbols to complex administration required more than just invention. It demanded specialized tools, workshops, and training, an early example of industrialization. Clay preparation was also critical. It had to be moist enough to accept impressions, but firm enough not to crumble. Scribes needed knowledge of clay properties, humidity, and drying techniques. Historians still debate how widespread literacy was in early Mesopotamia. Was writing confined to a small class of scribes and priests, or did merchants and officials use it more broadly? The tools and tablets suggest a well-organized bureaucracy, but literacy levels remain uncertain. Here's your quirky tidbit. The ancient Mesopotamians developed styluses of varying sizes and shapes for different tasks, some for fine script, others for large administrative records. Some styluses were made of wood, others of bone or metal. The design evolved to balance durability and precision. Moreover, the concept of writing wasn't just practical, it was deeply linked to divine authority. The goddess Nisaba was the patron of scribes and writing, illustrating how technology and religion intertwined. Writing was seen as a sacred act, connecting mortals to gods through the power of the written word. This ancient toolset was a breakthrough in human history, enabling complex societies to function, trade, legislate, and record their stories. The humble stylus and clay tablet laid the groundwork for all future writing, from papyrus scrolls to digital text. So next time you tap on a screen or write a note, spare a thought for those ancient scribes, wielding reeds over wet clay, inventing the very idea of writing, turning marks into memory, and technology into culture. We now delve into the vast and intricate world of ancient Rome, focusing on an engineering marvel that has baffled historians and scientists for centuries. Roman concrete. While today concrete is a staple in construction worldwide, its ancient counterpart possessed properties that modern formulas have struggled to replicate. Some Roman structures made with this material have survived over 2 millennia, resisting cracking, erosion, and even the relentless action of seawater. How did the Romans achieve such durability without the aid of modern chemistry or industrial processes? Roman concrete, known as opus cementitium, was a mixture of lime calcium oxide, volcanic ash, called pozzolana, water, and aggregates like pieces of rock or brick. The secret ingredient was the volcanic ash, which reacted chemically with the lime and water to form a mineral matrix that strengthened over time, a process quite different from the drying of modern Portland cement. This reaction made Roman concrete both incredibly strong and resilient. The best evidence of Roman concrete's superiority lies beneath the waves along the Mediterranean coast. The underwater structures of ancient harbors, such as those at Caesarea Maritima and the Bay of Naples, show remarkable resistance to seawater. Modern concrete, exposed to the ocean, tends to deteriorate due to chemical reactions with salt and water, but Roman maritime concrete actually became stronger over time. Recent studies suggest that seawater triggered the growth of rare minerals like aluminous tobamorate within the concrete, reinforcing the material. Historians still argue whether the Romans fully understood the chemistry behind their concrete, or if the durability was a fortunate accident discovered through trial and error. Ancient texts by Vitruvius describe mixing techniques and materials, but lack detailed chemical explanations. Yet, the empirical knowledge was enough to build structures like the Pantheon, with its vast unreinforced concrete dome, and aqueducts, bridges, and baths, that still stand today. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some researchers have proposed that the volcanic ash's source and composition were carefully selected to maximize performance. Different regions provided distinct types of pozzolana, and Roman engineers might have experimented with mixtures to suit specific construction needs, whether for underwater piers or towering domes. The rediscovery of Roman concrete's secrets is fueling modern interest in sustainable construction. Unlike modern concrete production, which generates significant carbon dioxide emissions, the Roman method used materials that required less energy to process and had a longer lifespan, potentially offering eco-friendly alternatives. Despite centuries of use and the vast influence of Roman engineering, the exact recipe and methods of creating concrete with such longevity were lost for over 1,000 years after Rome's fall. It wasn't until the 18th century that modern concrete was developed, and even now engineers study ancient Roman formulas to improve our building materials. Roman concrete embodies a blend of practical engineering, resourceful use of local materials, and empirical science, challenging the notion that technological sophistication is solely a product of modern times. It's a reminder that the ancients built not just monuments to power and art, but also materials that have outlasted empires. So when you walk beneath a Roman arch or stand inside the Pantheon's dome, know that you're in a space shaped by a material technology centuries ahead of its time, a concrete legacy, literally set in stone. From the marvel of Roman concrete, we journey to the mountainous regions of South America, where the Inca Empire engineered a network of agricultural terraces that continue to astound modern scientists. These terraces, carved into steep slopes and hillsides, transformed inhospitable terrain into fertile farmland, capable of feeding an empire of millions. But the ingenuity behind Inca terracing goes far beyond mere soil retention. It involves an understanding of microclimates, irrigation, and soil science that modern agriculture still studies with admiration. Inca terraces, or andines, were built in layers. The base layer consisted of large stones, providing drainage and stability. Above this lay layers of smaller stones, sand, and finally fertile topsoil brought in from riverbeds. This complex layering system prevented erosion, retained moisture, and allowed excess water to drain away, preventing root rot. The terraces also moderated temperature fluctuations, creating microclimates suitable for growing diverse crops, including potatoes, maize, and quinoa, at high altitudes. Mainstream historians credit the terraces with increasing food production and supporting the Inca's population. But recent research reveals even deeper sophistication. The terraces functioned as living laboratories for crop experimentation, with variations in altitude, slope, and exposure, allowing farmers to cultivate a wide range of species. Moreover, the terraces helped prevent landslides in seismic regions and stabilize the mountainous landscape. Historians still debate the extent of centralized control over terrace construction and maintenance. While some believe it was organized by the imperial government as part of the state's agricultural policies, others argue local communities had significant autonomy, blending traditional knowledge with Inca engineering. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some terraces were equipped with sophisticated irrigation channels that distributed glacial meltwater across vast areas. The Incas designed canals and reservoirs to capture seasonal water, releasing it carefully to maintain soil moisture throughout dry spells. Some of these irrigation systems are still in use today, a testament to their durability and design. Additionally, the terraces created temperature gradients known as thermal belts. Crops could be grown at different elevations to protect against frost or drought, maximizing yield. This vertical farming approach allowed the Incas to exploit every inch of available land. The terraces also played a social role, reinforcing community cohesion and labor organization through the Mitre system, where citizens contributed labor to state projects in rotation. This collective effort ensured the terraces' upkeep and productivity. Inca terracing exemplifies how ancient technology was not merely about construction, but integrated ecology, social structure, and food security. It's an agricultural wisdom that resonates today, reminding us that the past holds lessons for sustainable farming and environmental stewardship. Standing among these stone-walled fields, it's clear that the Incas turned mountains into granaries, soil into gold, and nature into a partner in survival, crafting landscapes that fed an empire and continue to nourish the world. Turning our gaze now to the city of Petra, nestled deep within the rose-red cliffs of southern Jordan, we encounter an ancient marvel that's as much a geological wonder as a human masterpiece. Petra, known as the Rose City for the color of its sandstone facades, is famous for its rock-cut architecture and intricate water management system, a technological feat that allowed a thriving civilization to flourish in the heart of the desert. The Nabateans, who built Petra between the 4th century BC and 2nd century CE, were masters of hydraulic engineering. Their city was carved directly into the cliffs, but beyond the spectacular tombs and temples lay an ingenious network of channels, cisterns, dams, and reservoirs designed to capture and store scarce rainfall. This water system transformed an arid landscape into a vibrant urban center supporting thousands of inhabitants. The cornerstone of Petra's water management was its sophisticated channeling system. The Nabateans carved narrow conduits into rock faces to collect rainwater and funnel it into cisterns hidden within the city. These cisterns stored water for drinking, agriculture, and sanitation during dry seasons. They also built dams to control flash floods, a common and destructive phenomenon in desert wadis, protecting the city's structures and inhabitants. Historians still debate how much of Petra's water system was original Nabatean innovation versus adaptations of earlier techniques from neighboring civilizations. Regardless, the engineering precision and scale were unmatched in the region, highlighting the Nabateans' ability to harness and coexist with their environment. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some of the rock-cut channels were lined with a form of waterproof cement made from natural mineral deposits, allowing water to flow without seeping into the porous sandstone. This early form of hydraulic concrete was vital to maintaining water quality and preventing loss. Additionally, Petra's planners designed the city layout to maximize water efficiency. Buildings and streets were oriented to funnel runoff into catchment areas. Gardens and agriculture thrived thanks to terraced fields, irrigated by the captured water. This made Petra a green oasis amid the harsh desert. The city's water system wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. Water was a precious resource, intertwined with religious rituals and social status. Control over water reinforced the Nabateans' political power and cultural identity. Though largely abandoned by the 7th century, Petra's ruins reveal a legacy of environmental adaptation and engineering ingenuity. Modern hydrologists study its systems for inspiration in sustainable water management, especially in arid regions facing water scarcity today. Walking Petra's ancient streets today, with water still trickling through stone channels and cisterns echoing with history, one can't help but marvel at a civilization that tamed desert floods, captured rain from rock, and built a city that thrives, centuries later, as a testament to ancient technology and resilience. Finally, we arrive at a place where ancient technology meets a deeper kind of mystery: the stone circles and standing stones scattered across the British Isles, with Stonehenge as the most famous of them all. But the story doesn't end with the giant trellithons on Salisbury Plain. Across the landscape are hundreds of lesser-known sites: Avebury, Callanish, Ring of Brodgar, each revealing a landscape shaped by prehistoric people with skills and intentions we can only begin to fathom. Stonehenge is often celebrated for its astronomical alignments, famously oriented toward the sunrise of the summer solstice. But its builders also seem to have engineered it with remarkable acoustic properties. Research shows that the arrangement of stones creates unique sound reflections, echo effects, and even zones of amplified vibration. Standing inside the circle, certain frequencies resonate, creating a space that's more than stone. It's a sound chamber, possibly designed for ritual chanting, drumming, or ceremonies intended to alter perception or consciousness. Historians still argue whether these acoustic effects were intentional or coincidental. The precision with which the massive sarsen and bluestones were quarried and transported from miles away suggests careful planning. Some researchers propose that the ringing properties of the bluestones, which can produce bell-like tones when struck, were part of the site's ritual experience. Here's your quirky tidbit: similar acoustic properties have been found in other megalithic sites worldwide, from the Mayan temples of Central America to the dolmens of Korea, suggesting ancient cultures independently discovered how to use sound within sacred spaces. The stones themselves also hold mysteries. Bluestones came from the Preseli Hills in Wales, nearly 50 miles away. How and why these smaller stones were transported such vast distances remains a subject of debate. Some theories suggest symbolic or spiritual importance attached to these stones beyond their physical presence. Furthermore, the surrounding landscape at Stonehenge is dotted with burial mounds, processional avenues, and smaller stone circles, forming a vast ritual landscape that evolved over centuries. This shows that Stonehenge was part of a complex network of sites, not a standalone monument. Despite thousands of years, the site still commands awe. Visitors report feelings of calm, spiritual connection, and wonder, as if the stones themselves hum with ancient energy. Stonehenge and its megalithic kin remind us that ancient technology was not just about practical survival, but about shaping experience, creating places where stone, sound, and sky converge to connect humans with the cosmos. And so, as we end this journey through ancient technologies that continue to puzzle and inspire, remember that these marvels are more than relics. They are whispers from our ancestors, enduring challenges to our understanding, and invitations to wonder at the ingenuity and spirit that built our world.